Humble woman misses her train home, and the stranger who decides to wait for her is a millionaire. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The last train's red taillights disappeared into the Boston night like dying embers, leaving Jennifer Renee Bennett alone on the South Station platform with nothing but the echo of her own frustrated sigh. October rain drummed against the station's glass ceiling, each drop a reminder of how thoroughly this day had unraveled. Her catering event, 3 months of planning, her signature jerk chicken sliders, her grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, had ended with unpaid invoices and a client who'd found issues with everything she'd poured her heart into. The rejection still stung like salt in an open wound. Jennifer pulled her denim jacket tighter around her curvy frame, her box braids heavy against her shoulders after escaping their morning style. The platform's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her mahogany skin, highlighting the exhaustion she couldn't hide anymore. 28 years old, culinary school graduate, business owner, and still catching the last train home because her catering van had broken down 6 blocks from her Roxbury apartment. Perfect, she whispered to the empty air, watching her breath form small clouds in the October chill. That's when she noticed him. Dr. Kevin Alexander Thaddeus III stood 30 feet away, motionless as a statue carved from grief. His Tom Ford suit remained immaculate, despite the dampness seeping through the station's aging infrastructure. At 36, he possessed the kind of refined handsomeness that belonged in medical journals. Sharp jawline, steel blue eyes, the bearing of someone accustomed to holding lives in his hands. But those same hands trembled slightly as he stared at the rain-slicked tracks. Around his neck, barely visible beneath his pristine collar, hung a thin gold chain. Jennifer caught the glint of what looked like a wedding ring sliding along the chain's length with each of his measured breaths. The station's PA system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, due to weather conditions, all remaining Red Line service has been suspended until tomorrow morning. We apologize for any inconvenience. Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from Gabrielle. Girl, you good. Storm's getting nasty out here. She typed back quickly. Stranded at South Station. Last train cancelled. Want me to come get you? Jennifer glanced at the man in the expensive suit, still staring at nothing. Something about his stillness unsettled her. Not dangerous, but profoundly sad, like he was carrying weight that might crush him if he moved too quickly. No, I'll figure it out. Talk tomorrow. The station began its nightly transformation from bustling hub to echoing cavern. Security guards made their rounds, gently encouraging the few remaining travelers toward the exits. Jennifer checked her banking app, $43.17, until her next catering gig, assuming Mrs. Patterson didn't cancel Tuesday's book club luncheon like 3 other clients had this month. Uber surge pricing glowed mockingly on her screen, $67 to Roxbury. Excuse me. The voice startled her from her financial calculations. Kevin stood closer now, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his perfect appearance couldn't quite mask something fundamentally broken underneath. I couldn't help but notice. He paused, seeming to wrestle with words that didn't come naturally. Are you also stranded? His accent carried the polished edges of private schools and Ivy League halls, but his question held genuine concern. Jennifer found herself studying his face, searching for the usual assumptions she'd learned to expect. The subtle once-over, the quick categorization, the polite distance wealthy white men typically maintained. Instead, she found only exhaustion that mirrored her own. Last train, she confirmed, gesturing toward the empty tracks. You? I don't drive. The admission seemed to cost him something. I was supposed to catch the 11:47 to... He trailed off, as if he'd forgotten his intended destination. Jennifer's grandmother used to say that God put people in your path for a reason, though she'd also warned about accepting rides from strangers. But something about this man's careful stillness, the way he held himself like he was afraid of breaking, made her usual caution feel unnecessarily cruel. Look, she said, surprising herself, I'm Jennifer. I live in Roxbury. If you're heading anywhere near there, maybe we could split an Uber. The surge pricing is brutal right now. He blinked, as if the concept of shared transportation was foreign. Kevin, he replied after a moment, I live in Beacon Hill. Of course he did. Beacon Hill, where the brownstones cost more than most people made in a decade, where her catering van looked as out of place as she probably did right now. That's not far from me. she lied smoothly. It was a 20-minute walk from Beacon Hill to Roxbury on a good day, but something about Kevin's careful posture suggested he needed the kindness more than she needed the accuracy. "I would appreciate that," he said quietly. "I can cover the full fare." "We'll split it," Jennifer insisted, her pride flaring despite her bank balance. "Fair is fair." As they waited for their ride in the station's dying light, Jennifer noticed Kevin's hands again. Surgeon's hands, steady and precise, but carrying tremors that spoke of more than just cold weather. The gold chain around his neck caught the light each time he breathed, and she found herself wondering about the story it told. Outside, Boston's October rain continued its relentless rhythm, washing the city clean for tomorrow's possibilities. Neither Jennifer nor Kevin knew that this shared ride would become the first thread in a tapestry that would reweave both their lives. But sometimes destiny announces itself not with fanfare, but with the simple necessity of getting home through the storm. The Uber's headlights appeared through the rain like hope, cutting through darkness, and Jennifer Renee Bennett made the decision that would change everything. She opened the car door and held it for a stranger whose sadness felt as deep as her own determination. 2 weeks later, Jennifer stood in the doorway of Kevin's Beacon Hill kitchen, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. "This is your kitchen?" she breathed, taking in the Sub-Zero refrigerator, the 8-burner Wolf range, the marble countertops that could have housed her entire Roxbury apartment. "Do you actually cook in here?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably behind her, his hospital scrubs a stark contrast to the kitchen's pristine grandeur. "Sarah did," he said quietly. She loved to cook." The past tense hung between them like morning fog, heavy with unspoken grief. Jennifer had learned through careful observation during their subsequent shared rides home that Kevin spoke of his wife and son only in fragments, a half-finished sentence here, a quickly diverted glance there. The gold ring around his neck told a story he wasn't ready to share completely. "It's beautiful," Jennifer said diplomatically, running her fingers along the butcher block island that was larger than her current workstation at home. 3 weeks ago she'd mentioned needing a larger space for her catering business during one of their quiet Uber rides. Kevin had offered his kitchen with the same careful politeness he brought to everything, as if he was afraid his words might break something precious. The arrangement was simple. She could use his professional-grade kitchen in exchange for preparing his meals. What he hadn't mentioned was that the kitchen looked like a museum exhibit, untouched except for the single coffee mug that sat alone in the vast sink each morning. "I should warn you," Kevin said, adjusting his hospital badge with nervous precision. "I'm not particular about food. Sarah used to say I'd eat cardboard if it was presented on a clean plate." "Good thing I don't cook cardboard," Jennifer replied, setting down her canvas tote bag filled with spices, her grandmother's cast-iron skillet, and the wooden spoon that had been blessed by 3 generations of women who knew that food was love made tangible. The house around them breathed with expensive silence. Jennifer had glimpsed it during her previous visits. Rooms filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest, family photos that stopped abruptly 3 years ago, a baby grand piano covered with a sheet that suggested music had died here along with laughter. Kevin's phone buzzed against his hip. "I need to get to the hospital," he said, already reaching for his keys. "Surgery at 7. I'll probably be late. Don't wait up. Don't feel obligated to—" He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "I'll make sure there's dinner when you get home," Jennifer said simply. "That's what we agreed on." After his car service arrived, he still wouldn't drive, she'd noticed. Jennifer began her exploration of the kitchen that could have fed a small restaurant. The spice rack held expensive bottles, most unopened. The freezer contained an array of frozen dinners that spoke of a man who had forgotten how to nourish himself. The refrigerator held bottled water, leftover Chinese takeout, and a single carton of milk 3 days past its expiration date. She started with music, her phone connected to the kitchen's sound system, filling the space with Alicia Keys' warm vocals. Then came the familiar ritual of preparation, onions diced with the precision her culinary school professors had demanded, garlic pressed until its aroma began to chase away the kitchen's sterile emptiness, chicken seasoned with the blend of spices that had made her catering business a whispered recommendation in Roxbury's tight-knit community. As she cooked, Jennifer began to notice the details Kevin probably thought were hidden. The cookbook with "Happy Anniversary, My Love, Sarah," written in fading purple ink. The refrigerator magnets from family vacations to Cape Cod, Disney World, places where a little boy had collected memories like shells. The high chair pushed into a corner, still bearing crayon marks from small fingers that had once drummed against its tray. By the time Kevin returned at nearly 10 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like Sunday dinners and second chances. Jennifer had prepared her grandmother's chicken and dumplings, mac and cheese that could make grown men weep, and green beans cooked with enough bacon to remind anyone that some rules were meant to be broken for the sake of joy. "I'm sorry I'm so late," Kevin said, stopping short when he saw the table set for two. Emergency surgery, a 12-year-old with a brain tumor. His voice carried the weight of all the children he couldn't save, all the promises medicine couldn't keep. "How is he?" Jennifer asked, ladling food onto plates that probably cost more than her rent. "Stable, for now." Kevin sat carefully, as if he'd forgotten how to occupy space in his own home. "This smells incredible." Jennifer watched as he took his first bite, saw the way his eyes closed involuntarily, the slight loosening of shoulders that had carried tension like armor. For a moment, the careful politeness fell away, and she glimpsed the man he might have been before grief carved away his softer edges. "My grandmother always said you can taste love in the cooking," Jennifer said quietly. "I think she was right." Kevin's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Sarah used to say something similar. She'd make these elaborate dinners, even on weeknights. Marcus, our son, he'd help her in the kitchen. There was always flour everywhere, and noise, and—" He set down his fork, the memory apparently too much to carry while eating. "How old was he?" Jennifer asked gently. 7. He would have been 10 last month. Kevin's voice barely rose above a whisper. He wanted to be a paleontologist, knew more about dinosaurs than most college students. They ate in companionable silence after that, the weight of shared stories settling between them like evening shadows. Jennifer noticed that Kevin finished everything on his plate, the first real meal he'd eaten in this kitchen in months, she suspected. "Jennifer," he said as she began clearing dishes, "I know this arrangement is temporary until you find a proper commercial space, but thank you for this, for treating my home like it deserves to be lived in again." She paused in her cleaning, struck by the careful way he chose his words, the gratitude that seemed too large for a simple meal. "Everyone deserves to come home to something good," she replied, "even neurosurgeons who work too late and forget to eat." As Jennifer gathered her things to leave, she noticed Kevin standing in the kitchen's center, looking around as if seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The gold ring around his neck caught the under-cabinet lighting, and for just a moment he looked less like a man haunted by ghosts and more like someone remembering what it felt like to be human. Tomorrow she would return with groceries and stories, with music and the kind of cooking that doesn't just fill stomachs, but feeds souls. Tonight, she left him with the lingering aroma of home and the promise that some spaces are meant to be filled with more than beautiful emptiness. But first she would call Gabriel and try to explain why cooking dinner for a grieving neurosurgeon felt less like charity and more like the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. "Teresa de Chulmas, girl, you've been cooking for this man for 3 weeks and you still call him Dr. Thaddeus." Gabrielle Washington adjusted her oversized hoop earrings while examining the fresh twist-out she'd been perfecting in the mirror of her Dorchester hair boutique. "That's not friendship, that's employment." Jennifer looked up from the inventory list she'd been reviewing. Kevin had insisted on reimbursing her for groceries, plus what he called a reasonable fee for her cooking services. The check he'd left on the counter Monday morning had been for more than she usually made in a week of catering gigs. "It's complicated, Gabby," Jennifer said, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "He's been through a lot." "Haven't we all, honey?" Gabrielle set down her wide tooth comb and fixed Jennifer with the look that had served as a truth detector since their freshman year at UMass. "But you said he smiled yesterday." "Actually smiled. When's the last time you saw a man light up over your cooking like that?" Jennifer thought about Kevin's expression when he'd tasted her cornbread the previous evening. For just a moment, his careful composure had cracked, and she'd seen something that looked almost like joy cross his features. He'd eaten 3 pieces, which for a man who usually ate like food was simply fuel, felt like a revelation. "It's not like that," Jennifer insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. We help each other. He gives me kitchen space. I make sure he doesn't survive on frozen dinners and hospital vending machine coffee." "Uh-huh." Gabrielle's manicured fingernail tapped against her phone screen. "And what about when Mrs. Patterson's bridge club cancelled on you Tuesday? What happened then?" Jennifer had mentioned that cancellation to Kevin during one of their increasingly comfortable dinner conversations. She'd tried to keep the disappointment out of her voice, Losing $300 worth of bookings in 1 week was more than a setback. It was approaching crisis territory for her fledgling business. What she hadn't expected was to find an envelope on the kitchen counter the next morning with a note in Kevin's precise handwriting: "For the inconvenience of my inconsistent schedule affecting your business operations, K." Inside had been $500 in cash. "He was just being considerate," Jennifer said weakly. "Considerate?" Gabriel laughed, the sound rich with disbelief. "Honey, considerate is holding the door. What you're describing sounds like a man who's starting to care." That afternoon, Jennifer arrived at Kevin's house to find him home earlier than usual, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open and what appeared to be financial documents spread across the marble surface. He looked up when she entered, and she caught something in his expression, a hesitation that seemed almost vulnerable. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to his papers. "I had some things to review, and the Home Office feels—" He paused, searching for words. "It feels too quiet sometimes." Jennifer had noticed that Kevin seemed to avoid certain parts of his house. The formal dining room remained untouched, and she'd never seen him venture upstairs during her visits. Even his bedroom, she suspected, was probably not the master suite, but some smaller space that didn't carry the weight of shared memories. "Of course not," she said, unpacking the ingredients for tonight's meal. "It's your house. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it," Kevin admitted quietly, then seemed surprised by his own honesty. Jennifer began her familiar routine, music filling the space, the methodical preparation that had always centered her thoughts. Today she was making oxtail stew, a recipe that required patience and attention, the kind of cooking that couldn't be rushed even by the most demanding schedule. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin said after several minutes of comfortable quiet. "Sure. Do you always cook like this, with so much—" He gestured vaguely at her movement around the kitchen, the way she'd unconsciously begun dancing slightly to the Lauryn Hill playing through the speakers. "Like what?" "Joy," he said simply. "Even when you're tired, even when you've had difficult days, you cook like it's a celebration." Jennifer paused in her chopping, considering the question. "My grandmother used to say that food is one of the few things we can control completely. No matter what's happening in the world, you can take simple ingredients and turn them into something that brings comfort. That's a kind of power, you know." Kevin nodded slowly, as if filing away her words for later contemplation. "I used to think that about surgery. The precision, the ability to fix what's broken. But sometimes—" He trailed off, his attention apparently caught by something in the documents before him. "Sometimes what?" Jennifer prompted gently. "Sometimes the thing that's broken can't be fixed with precision," he finished quietly. They worked in companionable silence after that, Jennifer at the stove, Kevin with his papers, and for the first time since she'd started coming here, the house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home where two people happened to exist in the same space without having to explain themselves. When Kevin's phone rang, he glanced at the screen, and his expression immediately shifted to something more guarded. "Dr. Mack," he answered, his voice taking on the professional tone Jennifer had learned to recognize as his armor against the world. She could hear only Kevin's side of the conversation, but the tension in his shoulders told her everything she needed to know about its content. "I understand your concern, Rick, but I'm managing fine." "No, I don't think that's necessary. I appreciate your interest in my well-being, but my personal life doesn't affect my surgical performance." When he hung up, Kevin sat motionless for several long moments, staring at his phone as if it had personally betrayed him. "Everything okay?" Jennifer asked carefully. "My department chief thinks I need to engage more fully with life," Kevin said, his tone making quotation marks around the phrase. "He's concerned that I'm too isolated." "Are you?" The question seemed to catch Kevin off guard. He looked around the kitchen, at Jennifer moving comfortably through what had once been Sarah's domain, at the evidence of life and warmth that hadn't existed here in years, at the meal taking shape that would fill his house with aromas that made it feel less like a shrine to loss and more like a place where the future might be possible. "I'm starting to think I might be," he admitted. Jennifer turned from the stove to find Kevin watching her, with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and confusion, as if he was trying to solve the equation that didn't follow the logical rules he'd built his life around. "Well," she said, seasoning the stew with the confidence of someone who understood that healing sometimes came disguised as a shared meal. "Lucky for you, I make excellent company." For the second time in 3 weeks, Kevin smiled, not the careful professional expression he wore like a uniform, but something genuine and surprised, as if he'd forgotten his face was capable of such expressions. As evening settled around them, Jennifer realized that Gabriel might have been right about one thing. What was happening in this kitchen was beginning to feel less like an arrangement and more like the delicate beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them desperately needed. Saisasti, Jennifer found Kevin sitting on his kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, his back against the refrigerator, still wearing his surgical scrubs from what must have been an 18-hour day. His face was buried in his hands, and the gold chain around his neck glinted in the soft under-cabinet lighting she'd left on out of habit. She'd let herself in with the key he'd given her 3 days ago, a gesture that had surprised them both, planning to prep ingredients for tomorrow's dinner service. Instead, she'd found evidence of a man coming apart at the seams, an untouched sandwich on the counter, prescription bottles scattered across the island, and Kevin himself collapsed in exhaustion and something deeper than fatigue. "Kevin?" she said softly, crouching down beside him. He looked up, and Jennifer's heart clenched at the raw desperation in his eyes. This wasn't the careful, controlled grief she'd grown accustomed to seeing. This was something primal and immediate, the kind of pain that strips away all pretense. "Lost one today," he said, his voice hoarse. 8 years old, brain tumor, just like Marcus had. Same age Marcus would be now if he couldn't finish the sentence. Jennifer settled beside him on the cool tile floor, not speaking, just being present in the way her grandmother had taught her. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone is your steady breathing next to theirs. Her parents kept asking if she was going to be okay. Kevin continued, staring at nothing. "Just like Sarah and I asked 3 years ago, and I gave them the same careful, professional explanations that Dr. Patterson gave us. All the statistics and treatment options and reasons for hope that mean nothing when your child is dying." He pulled the ring from beneath his scrubs, holding it between his fingers like a talisman that had lost its power to protect. "I became a neurosurgeon because I thought I could save people, fix brains like they were complicated machines. But some things can't be fixed, can they?" He looked at Jennifer with the expression of someone who'd spent years trying to solve an impossible equation. "Some people just leave, and all your knowledge and all your skill means nothing." Jennifer had learned through weeks of shared meals and careful conversation that Kevin blamed himself for more than just his inability to save his son. The accident, a drunk driver running a red light while Kevin was working late surgery, unable to pick up Marcus from school, had become the central narrative of his guilt. Sarah had been driving when it happened. Sarah, who had trusted him to be there when he was needed most. "You know what I've been thinking about," Jennifer said quietly. "My grandmother used to make this soup when I was sick. Chicken and rice, nothing fancy, but somehow it made everything better. Not because it had magical healing properties, but because making it was her way of loving me when she couldn't fix whatever was wrong." Kevin's breathing had steadied, but he continued staring at the ring in his palm. "Maybe being a healer isn't about fixing everything," Jennifer continued. "Maybe it's about showing up and doing what you can, even when what you can do isn't enough. That little girl today, you gave her family more time with her than they would have had without you. That matters." "Does it?" Kevin's voice was barely above a whisper. "My nephew died when he was 6, Jennifer said, the words coming out before she could reconsider them. "Sickle cell crisis. I was supposed to pick him up from school that day, but I had a catering event that I couldn't afford to lose. My sister went instead, and by the time they got to the hospital," she took a shaky breath, "I spent 2 years convinced that if I'd been there instead, somehow things would have been different. As if my presence could have changed his blood cells or altered the timing of everything." Kevin turned to look at her, really look at her, perhaps seeing for the first time that she understood grief not as an observer, but as a fellow traveler. How do you live with it?" he asked. "Some days better than others," Jennifer admitted. "But I learned that carrying guilt is different from carrying love. The guilt was making me smaller, making me afraid to commit to anything or anyone because I might let them down. The love makes me want to show up more fully, not less." They sat in silence for several minutes, the kitchen around them holding space for confessions that couldn't be shared in daylight hours. "I haven't been upstairs since the funeral," Kevin finally said. "Sarah and Marcus's things are still there exactly as they left them. Marcus's dinosaur models on his desk, Sarah's book on the nightstand with a bookmark on page 247. Sometimes I stand at the bottom of the stairs and think about going up, but I can't. It feels like I'd be disturbing something sacred." "Or maybe," Jennifer said gently, "you're afraid that going upstairs might mean you're ready to keep living, And you're not sure you deserve to. Kevin's hand closed around the ring, his knuckles white with tension. Some nights I sit in my car in the hospital parking garage and think about just not coming home. Not because I want to hurt myself, but because this house, this life, it all feels like evidence of my failure to protect the people who mattered most. But you do come home, Jennifer pointed out. Every night, you come home, and you eat dinner at that table, and you ask me about my day, and you smile when I tell you about Gabrielle's dating disasters. That's not failure, Kevin. That's courage. Jennifer stood and extended her hand to help him up. After a moment's hesitation, Kevin took it, allowing her to pull him to his feet. He was taller than she was, but in that moment, he seemed fragile in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. "I'm going to make you some tea," she said, "and you're going to sit at that island and tell me about that little girl you operated on today. Not about the outcome, but about who she was. What made her parents laugh when they talked about her. The things that made her special beyond her diagnosis." "Jennifer," Kevin started to protest. "Trust me," she said firmly. "Sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to see them as fully human, not just as a tragedy. That's true for the patients you lose, and it's true for Marcus and Sarah." As Jennifer moved around the kitchen preparing chamomile tea with honey the way her grandmother had taught her, Kevin began to speak, tentatively at first. Then with growing warmth he told her about Emma, the 8-year-old who'd collected stuffed elephants and wanted to be a veterinarian, about her parents' fierce devotion and their daughter's determination to beat what couldn't be beaten. And slowly, carefully, he began to tell Jennifer about Marcus. Not Marcus the tragedy, but Marcus the boy who'd built elaborate dinosaur worlds in his bedroom and insisted on packing his father's lunch every morning, complete with notes that said, "You're the best daddy," in crayon letters, that grew more confident with each passing week. By the time the sun began to rise over Beacon Hill, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer a grieving widower and a kind woman who cooked his meals. They had become two people who understood that sometimes healing begins not with fixing what's broken, but with finding the courage to live alongside the brokenness while still believing in the possibility of joy. "Saisi de Fabare, you're spending an awful lot of time in Beacon Hill lately," Gabrielle observed, sorting through natural hair products in her boutique while Jennifer sat in the styling chair, ostensibly getting her box braids refreshed, but really needing someone to talk to about the growing complexity of her arrangement with Kevin. "It's convenient," Jennifer said, though they both knew that wasn't the whole truth. "His kitchen is amazing, and the catering business is finally picking up. Mrs. Chen booked me for her daughter's graduation party, and the Johnsons want me to do their anniversary dinner." Gabrielle's tone suggested she wasn't buying the explanation. "And Dr. Thaddeus, how's he handling having life in his house again?" Jennifer thought about the previous evening, when she'd arrived to find Kevin in the kitchen ahead of her, attempting to make rice with the determination of someone approaching a complex surgical procedure. The result had been simultaneously burned and undercooked, a culinary feat that should have been impossible. "He's learning," she said carefully. "Yesterday he tried to cook dinner before I got there. Sweet potato and black bean chili from a recipe he found online. And? It was terrible," Jennifer laughed, "but he was so proud of himself for trying. He said it was the first time he'd cooked anything more complicated than scrambled eggs since Sarah died." What she didn't tell Gabrielle was how Kevin's face had lit up when she'd tasted his disaster of a meal and declared it definitely food, with such diplomatic kindness that he'd burst into laughter, real laughter, the kind that started in his chest and transformed his entire expression. "Jennifer," Gabrielle paused in her work, meeting Jennifer's eyes in the mirror, "I've known you for 10 years. I've seen you date musicians who thought paying rent was optional, and that finance guy who tried to optimize your grandmother's recipes for scalability. I've never seen you talk about a man the way you talk about him." "It's not like that," Jennifer protested, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time she said them. "What's it like then?" Jennifer struggled to find language for something that had no clear definition. "He's healing, I think, and I'm helping with that. But it's not romantic. We're just two people who've found a way to make each other's lives a little less difficult." "Baby girl," Gabrielle said gently, her hands working through Jennifer's hair with practiced ease. "Sometimes the most powerful love stories start with two people just making each other's lives less difficult." That afternoon, Jennifer arrived at Kevin's house to find him waiting in the kitchen with an expression she'd learned to associate with important conversations, the same careful composure he probably wore when delivering complex medical information to patients' families. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble. "Dr. Mack thinks I should consider dating again." Jennifer's hands stilled on the grocery bags she'd been unpacking. "Oh, he believes that my continued social isolation is unhealthy," Kevin continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone he used when discussing difficult topics. "He's arranged for me to have dinner with his wife's sister. She's a dermatologist, recently divorced, no children. He thinks we'd be compatible." The word compatible hung between them like a medical diagnosis neither of them wanted to hear. That sounds nice," Jennifer managed, though something sharp and unexpected twisted in her chest. "When?" "Tomorrow night." Kevin was watching her carefully, as if trying to read something in her expression. "I wanted you to know, because it means I won't be home for dinner." "Of course, that's fine, it's your life." Jennifer turned back to the groceries with more focus than organizing vegetables typically required. Behind her, she could hear Kevin moving restlessly around the kitchen, the soft sound of his dress shoes against the tile floor marking time like a nervous heartbeat. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "I don't want you to think that this changes our arrangement. What we have here, this friendship, it's important to me. More important than I probably have the words to express." The word friendship should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a door being gently but firmly closed. "I understand," she said, pulling out ingredients for the Korean-spiced short ribs she'd planned to make. "You deserve to have a full life, Kevin, not just work and grief and dinner with the woman who cooks for you." "Is that what you think this is?" Kevin's voice carried a note of surprise. "You think you're just the woman who cooks for me?" Jennifer turned to face him, really looking at him for perhaps the first time since this conversation began. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his blue-gray eyes held an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "What else would I be?" she asked quietly. Kevin opened his mouth as if to answer, then closed it again, seeming to wrestle with words that wouldn't arrange themselves properly. The silence stretched between them, filled with things neither of them knew how to say. "I should let you get ready for your evening," Jennifer finally said, beginning to put the groceries away with mechanical efficiency. "I'll just leave these ingredients for tomorrow, and you can—" "I don't want to go," Kevin interrupted, the words coming out in a rush. "The dinner, I mean. I don't want to have polite conversation with someone who doesn't know that Marcus collected dinosaur models or that Sarah sang off-key in the shower every morning. I don't want to pretend that I'm ready to be the kind of person who goes on dates and makes small talk about wine preferences and vacation destinations." Jennifer's hands stilled on the refrigerator door. "Then why are you going?" "Because Dr. Mack is probably right. Because staying in this house, eating meals with you, listening to your stories about Gabriel and your catering clients, it's not real life, is it? It's just a pause. A beautiful pause, but still a pause." "And what if it's not?" Jennifer asked, surprising herself with the question. "What if this is real life? What if two people finding comfort in each other's company, sharing meals and stories and honest conversation? What if that's actually the most real thing either of us has experienced in years?" Kevin stared at her, and Jennifer realized she'd crossed some invisible line they'd both been carefully avoiding. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting for one of them to retreat to safer ground. Instead, Kevin took a step closer. "Jennifer," he said, her name soft in his mouth like a prayer or a question. "I need you to know that these weeks with you, they've been the first time since the accident that I've felt like a person instead of just a collection of professional responsibilities and guilt." The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way that made Jennifer's breath catch. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he was offering her something precious and fragile that could be easily broken by the wrong response. "Kevin," she started, but he held up a hand, not quite ready to hear whatever she might say. "I'm going to go to this dinner tomorrow," he continued, "because I need to prove to myself that what I feel when I'm with you isn't just gratitude or loneliness or the comfort of routine. I need to know if I can sit across from another woman and feel even a fraction of what I feel when you laugh at my terrible jokes, or when you hum while you're cooking, or when you look at me like I'm worth more than the sum of my mistakes." Jennifer felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't have said exactly why. "And if you can't?" Kevin's smile was small and uncertain, but genuine. "Then I suppose I'll have to have a very honest conversation with myself about what's been happening in this kitchen for the past month." Dr. Patricia Hammond was everything Kevin had expected. Intelligent, accomplished, attractive in the polished way, of someone who understood that appearance was part of professional success. She talked knowledgeably about medical journals, shared amusing anecdotes from her dermatology practice, and asked thoughtful questions about his work in neurosurgery. She was also nothing like Jennifer. Kevin realized this somewhere between the appetizer course and Patricia's detailed explanation of a new laser treatment for age spots. There was nothing wrong with the conversation. It was perfectly pleasant, professionally engaging, exactly the kind of interaction Dr. Mack probably imagined when he'd arranged this dinner. But Kevin found himself thinking about Jennifer's laugh, the way she'd scrunch her nose when she was concentrating on seasoning, how she could make even mundane stories about difficult catering clients feel like adventures worth sharing. "Kevin?" Patricia's voice brought him back to the present. "I asked about your hobbies outside of medicine." "I'm sorry," he said, attempting to refocus on the woman across from him. "I was thinking about, I used to run along the Charles River before my family died. I haven't really developed new interests since then." Patricia's expression softened with professional sympathy. "Rick mentioned you'd experienced a significant loss. That must be incredibly difficult." Kevin nodded, recognizing the tone. It was the same careful compassion he'd learned to use with patients' families, kind, but ultimately distant. Patricia was a good person, he realized, someone who would make an excellent partner for the right man. But as she continued talking about grief counseling and healthy coping mechanisms, Kevin understood with growing clarity that he was not that man. What he wanted was to be home, in his kitchen, listening to Jennifer tell him about her day, while she transformed simple ingredients into something that tasted like comfort and possibility. He wanted the easy silences they'd developed, the way she could make him laugh without trying, how she never treated his grief like a problem to be solved, but simply as part of who he was. "I should be honest with you," Kevin said, interrupting Patricia's thoughtful monologue about work-life balance. "I don't think I'm ready for this. Dating, I mean. My life is complicated right now." Patricia smiled with understanding that seemed genuine, rather than disappointed. "I appreciate your honesty. Rick was probably overly optimistic about your readiness to move forward." "It's not that I don't want to move forward," Kevin said, surprised by his own clarity. "It's that I think I already am, just not in the way anyone expected." An hour later, Kevin stood outside his Beacon Hill house, key in hand, fighting the urge to call Jennifer and ask her to come over despite the late hour. The house felt different when he entered. Not empty, exactly, but waiting. As if it knew that something important was about to happen within its walls, he found Jennifer's note on the kitchen counter, written in her neat handwriting. "Short ribs are in the slow cooker, rice in the rice maker. Heat the vegetables for 3 minutes. Hope your evening was lovely. J." Below her initial, she'd drawn a small smiley face that made Kevin's chest tight with an emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. The next morning, Jennifer arrived to find Kevin already in the kitchen, dressed for work but lingering over coffee as if he was waiting for something. "How was your date?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral as she began unpacking ingredients for lunch prep. "Educational," Kevin replied, which wasn't exactly an answer. Jennifer glanced at him, noting the thoughtful expression he wore when he was working through a complex problem. "That sounds mysterious." "Patricia is lovely," Kevin said slowly. "Intelligent, successful, everything Dr. Mack probably thought I needed. We had a perfectly pleasant conversation about medicine and professional development and shared interests." "But?" Jennifer prompted, sensing there was more to this story. Kevin set down his coffee mug and turned to face her fully. "But I spent the entire evening thinking about how much more I enjoy talking to you about your grandmother's recipes and Gabrielle's dating disasters and whether you think the Celtics have a chance this season." Jennifer's hands stilled on the vegetables she'd been washing. "Kevin, I realized something last night," he continued, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "I've been thinking about what we have here as temporary, a convenient arrangement that's helping both of us through difficult periods. But what if it's not temporary? What if this is just what happiness looks like when you're not expecting it?" Jennifer turned off the water and faced him, her heart doing something irregular in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Dr. Mack was right about one thing. I was isolating myself, avoiding life instead of living it. But he was wrong about the solution. I don't need to date strangers and make small talk over expensive wine. I need to stop being afraid of caring about someone again. I need to stop pretending that what I feel for you is just gratitude." The kitchen seemed to hold its breath around them. Jennifer could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of Boston traffic, her own heartbeat loud in her ears. "What do you feel for me?" she asked quietly. Kevin took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his blue-grey eyes, the way his careful composure had given way to something more vulnerable and real. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking for 3 years, and you've been gently waking me up, one shared meal at a time," he said. "I feel like this house has been a museum to my past, and you've been teaching it how to be a home again. I feel like I've been so afraid of dishonoring Sarah and Marcus's memory by being happy that I forgot happiness might be the best way to honor them." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. "Kevin, I'm not asking you to fix me," he continued. "I'm not even sure I can be fixed completely. I'll always carry grief, and there will probably always be days when the weight of it makes me difficult to be around. But if you're willing, I'd like to stop pretending that what we have is just convenient and start acknowledging that it might be the best thing that's happened to either of us in a long time." Jennifer reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone with gentle reverence. "You beautiful, complicated man," she whispered. "Don't you know that I stopped thinking of this as just an arrangement weeks ago?" Kevin leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if her words were a benediction he'd been waiting to receive. "So what happens now?" he asked. Jennifer smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Now I make you breakfast and you tell me about every boring moment of your date last night, and we stop being afraid of whatever this is becoming." As morning light filled the kitchen where they'd been slowly, carefully falling in love without either of them quite realizing it, Kevin finally understood what Dr. Mack had been trying to tell him. Healing didn't always look like moving on. Sometimes it looked like moving forward, carrying love instead of just loss, building something new without forgetting what came before. Thursday dissertive 3 days after Kevin's confession in the kitchen, Jennifer found herself standing at the bottom of the staircase in his Beacon Hill house, looking up at the second floor that had remained untouched for 3 years. Kevin was beside her, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the banister. "You don't have to do this today," Jennifer said softly, "or at all, if you're not ready." "I want to," Kevin replied, though his voice carried the weight of someone trying to convince himself as much as her. "Sarah's sister has been asking about some of her jewelry, family pieces that should go to her nieces, and Marcus's dinosaur collection. There's a little boy at the hospital whose parents can't afford toys. His name is Daniel, and he has the same brain tumor Marcus had." Jennifer understood the significance of this gift in ways that Kevin probably couldn't articulate, the difference between preserving everything as a shrine and choosing to let objects carry love forward to children who needed them. "I'll be right here with you," she said, taking his hand. "Every step." The master bedroom at the top of the stairs looked like it was waiting for its occupants to return from a brief vacation. Sarah's book still lay open on the nightstand, a reading glasses case beside it. Kevin's side of the bed was made with military precision, but Sarah's side remained rumpled, as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. Kevin stood frozen in the doorway, his breathing shallow and quick. "Tell me about her," Jennifer said, understanding instinctively that memories needed to be spoken aloud before objects could be touched. "She was terrible at making beds," Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every morning I'd make my side perfectly, and she'd just pull the covers up on hers and call it done. It drove me crazy the first year we were married. After that, it became one of the things I loved most about her. How she refused to waste time on things that didn't matter." Jennifer squeezed his hand. What did matter to her? People. Stories. She could talk to anyone. The barista at our coffee shop knew about her book club. The grocery store clerks would save the best produce for her. Our mailman would stop and chat about his grandchildren. She made everyone feel seen. As Kevin talked, Jennifer noticed the photographs on Sarah's dresser. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, but mostly images of Marcus at various ages. A chubby baby, a gap-toothed kindergartner, a 7-year-old grinning beside an enormous dinosaur display at the Museum of Science. "He looks like he had your eyes," Jennifer observed, studying a school portrait of Marcus in a Batman t-shirt. Sarah's smile, though, and her ability to make friends. His teacher said he was the kid who made sure no one sat alone at lunch. Kevin's voice broke slightly. "He was going to be better than both of us." They worked slowly through Sarah's jewelry box, Kevin sharing the story behind each piece, as he set aside items for her sister. Sarah's engagement ring, too personal to give away, but too painful to see every day. Her grandmother's pearls, which should go to Sarah's niece when she turned 16. The silly costume jewelry Marcus had given her for various Mother's Days, which Kevin couldn't bear to part with. Marcus's room proved even more challenging. The walls were covered with dinosaur posters, the shelves lined with carefully arranged models and picture books about paleontology. His bed was made with the same precision as Kevin's, but a stuffed triceratops sat on the pillow, worn soft from nightly snuggles. He organized them by time period, Kevin said, gesturing to the dinosaur collection. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. He was 7 years old and could pronounce Pachycephalosaurus better than most adults. Jennifer watched Kevin carefully select specific models to pack for Daniel at the hospital. Not the rarest or most expensive ones, but the sturdy, well-loved figures that had clearly been favorites for actual play rather than display. Marcus would like that. Another little boy will love these, Jennifer said. I hope so. Kevin paused, holding a small velociraptor that showed signs of having been carried everywhere. Sometimes I worry that giving his things away means I'm letting go of him, but keeping everything exactly as he left it hasn't brought him back either. Maybe, Jennifer suggested gently, the point isn't to hold on to him or let him go. Maybe it's to carry him with you in a way that doesn't make it impossible to keep living. As afternoon faded into evening, they'd managed to pack 2 boxes, one for Sarah's sister, one for Daniel at the hospital. It was a small beginning, but Jennifer could see something shift in Kevin's posture as they worked. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of choice. The difference between being paralyzed by loss and deciding how to honor it. That night, over dinner in the kitchen that had become their sanctuary, Kevin was quieter than usual. Jennifer let the silence stretch, understanding that some processing couldn't be rushed. I keep thinking about what you said, Kevin finally spoke, about carrying them with me instead of trying to preserve everything exactly as they left it. It's just one way to think about it, Jennifer said carefully. There's no right way to grieve, but there might be healthier ways to love them. Kevin looked up from his plate, meeting her eyes. I've been so focused on not changing anything that I forgot they would have wanted me to keep changing, keep growing. Sarah used to get frustrated when I'd work too many hours or skip meals. She'd say I was too important to too many people to neglect taking care of myself. Jennifer felt something warm and painful bloom in her chest. She sounds like she was wise. She was, and she would have liked you. Kevin's statement was simple, but Jennifer understood the weight of it. She would have loved how you make everything feel like a celebration, even simple Tuesday dinners. She would have appreciated how you never tried to fix me, just accompanied me. Do you really think so? Kevin nodded. Sarah believed that love multiplies rather than divides. That loving someone new doesn't diminish what you felt for someone else. I never understood what she meant until now. Jennifer reached across the table to take his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. What do you understand now? That falling in love with you doesn't make me love them less, Kevin said, the words carrying the weight of a revelation that had taken months to surface. It makes me remember what love feels like when it's not just memory and grief. It makes me want to be the kind of person worthy of being loved again. In the quiet of the kitchen, where they'd slowly, carefully built something neither of them had expected, Jennifer realized that healing sometimes looked like this. Not the dramatic breakthroughs of movies, but the gentle daily choice to carry love forward instead of just carrying loss. Kevin, she said softly, you've always been worthy of being loved again. You just needed to be ready to believe it. So this is the famous Jennifer, Dr. Richard Mack said, extending his hand with the confident warmth of someone accustomed to making good first impressions. Kevin talks about you constantly. I was beginning to think you were a figment of his imagination. Jennifer shook his hand, acutely aware that she was being evaluated by Kevin's mentor and department chief. They were at Mass General's annual holiday party, and Kevin had asked her to attend as his guest, the first time they'd appeared together publicly as anything more than friends. All good things, I hope, Jennifer replied, grateful for the confidence that years of catering high-end events had given her in navigating conversations with Boston's professional elite. Exclusively good things, Dr. Mack assured her, though he failed to mention how radiant you are. Kevin, you undersold her considerably. Kevin appeared at Jennifer's elbow with 2 glasses of wine, his hand settling naturally at the small of her back. The gesture was subtle but possessive, and Jennifer noticed how several of his colleagues tracked the movement with interest. Rick, please don't embarrass me in front of Jennifer, Kevin said, though his tone was affectionate. She already thinks I'm socially awkward. I think you're charmingly awkward, Jennifer corrected, accepting her wine with a smile that made Kevin's expression soften in a way that wasn't lost on Dr. Mack. As the evening progressed, Jennifer found herself navigating conversations about medical research, hospital politics, and the complex dynamics of academic medicine. She held her own admirably, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories from her catering business that made even the most serious surgeons laugh. But she also noticed the way some conversations paused when she approached, the carefully polite interest that masked curiosity about how the chief of neurosurgery's grieving protégé had ended up with a black woman who cooked for a living. "Your girlfriend is lovely," Dr. Patricia Hammond said, appearing beside Kevin during a brief moment when Jennifer was engaged in animated conversation with a group of residents about the best restaurants in different Boston neighborhoods. Kevin tensed slightly. He and Patricia had maintained cordial professional relations since their single unsuccessful date, but her presence still reminded him of expectations he'd failed to meet. "She's remarkable," Kevin replied simply. "Very different from Sarah," Patricia observed, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes," Kevin said, watching Jennifer demonstrate the proper way to hold chopsticks to a resident who'd confessed to struggling with Asian cuisine. "She is." Patricia seemed to be waiting for more elaboration, but Kevin had learned that some statements were complete in themselves. Jennifer was different from Sarah, more outgoing, more spontaneous, more willing to challenge his tendency toward isolation. But she was also similar in the ways that mattered most: her capacity for kindness, her ability to make ordinary moments feel special, her instinct to care for others even when it cost her something. "Kevin," Dr. Mack appeared, interrupting the moment. "I'd like you to meet Dr. James Morrison from Hopkins. He's very interested in the surgical technique you used on the Patterson case." As Kevin was drawn into a professional conversation, Jennifer found herself temporarily alone, observing the party from the periphery. The Mass General holiday party was elegant in the way of institutional celebrations, tasteful decorations, quality catering, conversations that balanced personal warmth with professional networking. She was watching Kevin across the room, noting how he'd become more animated in the months since they'd met, when someone approached from behind. "You must have quite a story," the woman said. Jennifer turned to find an elegant older woman with silver hair and expensive jewelry, holding a martini with practiced ease. "I'm sorry?" Jennifer replied politely. "Kevin Thaddeus," the woman clarified. "Brilliant surgeon, devastated widower, hasn't been seen with a woman since his family died. And now here you are, looking at him like he hung the moon, and him looking at you like you saved his life." Jennifer felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "Kevin and I are very happy together." "I'm sure you are, dear. I'm Margaret Crawford. My late husband was chief of surgery here for 20 years. I've watched Kevin grow from a cocky resident to one of the finest neurosurgeons on the East Coast. I've also watched him nearly destroy himself with grief these past 3 years." Jennifer wasn't sure if she was being warned or welcomed, so she simply nodded. "Whatever you've done," Margaret continued, "keep doing it. He looks alive again." "That's not something I thought I'd see." Before Jennifer could respond, Kevin appeared at her side, his hand finding hers with the automatic comfort of established intimacy. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, nodding respectfully to the older woman. "I see you've met Jennifer." "Indeed I have. She's lovely, Kevin." Sarah would have approved. The statement hung in the air for a moment, carrying weight that Jennifer didn't fully understand, but Kevin clearly did. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." Later, as they waited for their Uber outside the hospital, Jennifer found herself processing the evening's undercurrents. "That was interesting," she said carefully. "Hospital parties always are," Kevin replied. "Too many strong personalities in one room, everyone trying to balance personal and professional relationships. Is that what we were doing? Balancing?" Kevin looked at her sharply, catching something in her tone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent the evening feeling like I was being evaluated for my suitability as your girlfriend by people who knew Sarah, knew your previous life, like they were all wondering what you were doing with someone so different from what they expected." Kevin was quiet for a long moment, watching the hospital's windows glow against the December night. "Jennifer," he said finally, "I need you to understand something. Sarah was perfect for who I was then, a young surgeon trying to build a career, someone who needed stability and support, and someone who could navigate the social expectations of academic medicine. She was brilliant at being a surgeon's wife." Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And I'm not?" "You're not a surgeon's wife," Kevin said, turning to face her fully. "You're Jennifer Bennett, chef and entrepreneur, and the woman who taught me that love doesn't have to look the same twice to be real. You're not trying to fit into the life I had before. You're helping me build a life I actually want to live." The Uber arrived before Jennifer could respond, But as they settled into the back seat, Kevin took her hand again. "I don't want you to be like Sarah," he said quietly. "I want you to be exactly who you are. The woman who puts hot sauce on everything, who sings Beyoncé while she cooks, who makes me laugh until my stomach hurts, who sees me as Kevin instead of Dr. Thaddeus, the tragic widower. I fell in love with you, not with your potential to become someone else." Jennifer felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the words still new enough to feel like a gift each time they were spoken. As their car wound through Boston's familiar streets, Jennifer realized that belonging didn't always mean fitting in. Sometimes it meant finding someone who valued exactly the ways you didn't fit, someone who saw your differences as strengths rather than obstacles to overcome. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in January, shattering the quiet of Jennifer's Roxbury apartment and Kevin's careful equilibrium in a single moment. "Kevin?" Jennifer answered her phone, immediately alert despite the hour. After 6 months together, she'd learned that middle-of-the-night calls usually meant medical emergencies that required Kevin's immediate attention. "Jennifer." His voice was rough, strained in a way that made her chest tighten with concern. Could you come? To the hospital? I don't think I should drive right now." She was pulling on clothes before he finished speaking. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Multiple casualty accident on Route 93, drunk driver." The words came out mechanically, as if Kevin was reading from a medical report. 3 cars involved, 2 fatalities so far, 4 critical patients incoming. The drunk driver survived without a scratch. Jennifer's blood went cold as she understood the terrible parallel. "Kevin, I'm coming. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "I can't do this," Kevin continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "The lead trauma surgeon, and I can't even scrub in because my hands won't stop shaking. Dr. Nakamura had to take my cases. I'm sitting in an on-call room like a first-year resident having a panic attack." "Breathe," Jennifer said firmly, grabbing her keys and heading for the door. "Just breathe, Kevin. I'm already in my car." Mass General at 4 a.m. was a different creature than the bustling daytime hospital Jennifer had visited for Kevin's holiday party. The emergency department hummed with controlled chaos, trauma teams working with practiced efficiency, the controlled urgency that saved lives when minutes mattered. Jennifer found Kevin in a small on-call room, still wearing scrubs but sitting on the narrow bed with his head in his hands. The gold chain around his neck was visible, and she realized he was gripping Sarah's wedding ring through the fabric of his shirt, like a talisman. "Hey," she said softly, closing the door behind her. Kevin looked up, and Jennifer's heart broke at the devastation in his eyes. This wasn't the controlled grief she'd grown accustomed to, but something raw and immediate, trauma layering on top of trauma in a way that threatened to undo months of careful healing. "I can't get the images out of my head," Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The car seats in the back of the minivan. Empty car seats, Jennifer. Just like Marcus's was when they brought him in." Jennifer sat beside him on the narrow bed, not speaking, just breathing steadily beside him the way she'd learned to do when words weren't enough. "The drunk driver kept asking if everyone was okay," Kevin continued, "kept insisting it wasn't his fault, that the other cars came out of nowhere, just like the man who killed my family. Righteous indignation from someone who destroyed everything good in the world and walked away without a scratch." "Where is he now?" Jennifer asked carefully. "ICU. Observation for minor injuries and alcohol poisoning. He'll probably be discharged tomorrow, maybe face some charges that'll get reduced to a fine and community service." Kevin's hands clenched into fists. "The mother of the family in the minivan died 20 minutes ago. 34 years old, Jennifer. Her husband is in surgery with Dr. Park, and her 2 kids are in pediatric ICU." Jennifer felt the familiar helplessness that came with witnessing pain that couldn't be fixed, only endured. But she also recognized something else in Kevin's breakdown, not just grief, but rage, clean, honest anger that he'd never allowed himself to feel about his own loss. "I wanted to hurt him," Kevin admitted, shame coloring his voice. "For 30 seconds, standing outside his room, I wanted to cause him the same pain he'd caused that family. I've never felt anything like that before, and it terrified me." "You're human," Jennifer said simply. "Anger is normal when you witness injustice. The fact that you didn't act on it, that you recognized it and walked away, that's what matters." "But what if I can't do this anymore?" Kevin's voice cracked. "What if every trauma case is going to send me back to that night 3 years ago? What if I can't be the surgeon these patients need because I'm too broken to function when it matters most?" Jennifer took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Kevin, listen to me. You've saved hundreds of lives over the past 3 years. Hundreds of families got to keep their people because of your skill and dedication. One bad night doesn't erase all of that. But what if it happens again? Then we'll deal with it again, Jennifer said firmly. You, me, Dr. Mack, whoever you need. But you don't get to use one moment of human vulnerability to decide you're unfit for the work you were born to do. Kevin leaned into her touch, and Jennifer could feel some of the tension begin to leave his shoulders. The attending physician who treated Marcus, Kevin said quietly, I never understood why he looked so haunted when he had to tell us there was nothing more they could do. I thought it was just professional sympathy, but now I know. He was seeing his own child in every patient, remembering every case he couldn't save. How do doctors do this job without falling apart? The same way chefs keep cooking after they burn themselves, Jennifer said. The same way anyone keeps doing work that matters despite the risk of getting hurt. You learn to carry the pain differently, but you don't stop doing the work. They sat in silence for several minutes, the distant sounds of the hospital around them, codes being called, equipment beeping, the steady rhythm of an institution dedicated to fighting death, one patient at a time. I love you, Kevin said suddenly, the words carrying more weight than usual. Not just for coming here tonight, but for seeing me at my worst and not running, for believing I'm stronger than I feel right now. I love you too, Jennifer replied. Strong enough to fall apart sometimes, strong enough to put yourself back together, strong enough to keep showing up even when it's terrifying. Kevin's pager buzzed, and they both looked at it automatically. Dr. Nakamura, Kevin said, reading the display, probably needs consultation on one of the trauma cases. Are you ready? Jennifer asked. Kevin took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders in a gesture Jennifer had learned to recognize as him stepping back into his professional role. I think so, he said. But will you stay? Until I'm sure I can handle whatever's waiting out there? I'll stay as long as you need me, Jennifer promised. Tonight, tomorrow, however long it takes. As Kevin prepared to return to the work that defined him, Jennifer understood that love sometimes meant witnessing someone's breaking point and helping them remember who they were strong enough to become. Tonight had shown them both that healing wasn't linear, that strength looked like showing up even when you were afraid, and that some storms had to be weathered together to prove that what you'd built between you could survive anything. Falke Saint-Offier Willavaneth, the blackout, hit Beacon Hill just as the February storm reached its peak, plunging Kevin's house into darkness, while Jennifer was putting the finishing touches on dinner. The power failure felt like a punctuation mark on a day that had already tested them both. Jennifer's biggest catering contract had fallen through that morning, and Kevin had spent 14 hours in surgery trying to save a teenager who reminded him too much of what Marcus might have become. Perfect timing, Jennifer muttered, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the kitchen she'd come to know by heart. The beef bourguignon she'd been preparing would need to finish cooking somehow, and the chocolate soufflés in the oven were certainly ruined. She found Kevin standing in the living room, staring out at the dark street where other houses flickered with emergency candles and the occasional generators glow. Snow continued to fall steadily, muffling the usual city sounds and creating the kind of profound quiet that made everything feel suspended in time. The weather service says the power could be out until morning, Kevin said without turning around. I should probably call you a cab before the roads get worse. But even as he said it, Jennifer could hear in his voice that he didn't want her to leave. 6 months of reading his moods, his careful politeness that masked deeper needs, had taught her to listen for what he couldn't quite ask for directly. Or, Jennifer said, setting down her phone and moving to stand beside him at the window, I could stay, help you find candles and figure out how to cook dinner over a fire like our ancestors did. Kevin turned to look at her, his face partially illuminated by the snow's reflected light. Are you sure? Your apartment probably has power, and this could last all night. Kevin, Jennifer said gently, do you want me to stay? The question hung between them, carrying weight beyond just tonight's storm. After the crisis at the hospital 3 weeks ago, something had shifted between them, not just deeper intimacy, but a recognition that they were building something meant to weather difficulties, rather than just exist in comfortable moments. Yes, Kevin said simply. I always want you to stay. They spent the next hour transforming the house into something that could function without electricity. Kevin proved surprisingly adept at building fires, and Jennifer managed to salvage their dinner by finishing the beef bourguignon in a cast-iron pot over the flames. Candles appeared from various rooms, creating pools of warm light that made even the formal living room feel intimate. This is actually kind of romantic, Jennifer observed, settling beside Kevin on the sofa with bowls of successfully rescued dinner and wine that had been chilling in the snow outside. Unintentionally, Kevin agreed, but he was smiling in the way that still surprised her. Unguarded, genuinely happy rather than just politely pleased. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Jennifer said, tucking her feet under her and settling against his shoulder. "I'm afraid of the dark," Kevin admitted quietly. "Have been since I was a child. Something about not being able to see what's coming, not being in control of my environment. After Sarah and Marcus died, I started sleeping with every light in the house on." Jennifer processed this information, understanding now why Kevin had seemed tense when the power first went out, why he'd been standing so rigidly at the window. "But you seem okay now," she observed. "I am okay now," Kevin said, sounding slightly surprised by his own statement. "I think it's different when you're not facing the darkness alone." As the evening deepened around them, they found themselves talking about things that daylight somehow made too vulnerable to share. Kevin told her about the first time he'd saved a child's life, how he'd called Sarah immediately afterward and cried with relief and terror at the responsibility of holding other people's futures in his hands. Jennifer shared stories about her grandmother's final weeks, how cooking had become her way of staying connected to someone she was losing by degrees. "I've been thinking about something," Kevin said during a lull in their conversation, his fingers playing absently with Jennifer's hair. "About us, about what we're building together." Jennifer felt her heartbeat pick up slightly. "What about it? 6 months ago, I thought my life was essentially over. Not that I wanted to die, but that everything meaningful had already happened to me. The best I could hope for was to exist quietly, do my work, try not to cause anyone else pain by being too damaged to function properly." "And now?" Jennifer prompted gently. "Now I wake up looking forward to things again. Not just seeing you, though that's certainly part of it, but possibilities. I want to travel with you, introduce you to colleagues who've become friends, take you to places Sarah and I never went so we can make completely new memories." Jennifer lifted her head to look at him directly. "That sounds like a man who's decided to keep living instead of just surviving." "It sounds like a man who's fallen completely in love," Kevin corrected, his voice carrying the wonder of someone still surprised by his own capacity for happiness. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls, as Jennifer absorbed the weight of his words. They'd said, "I love you" before, but this felt different, less like a declaration and more like a recognition of something that had grown too large to contain. "Kevin," Jennifer said, shifting to face him fully, "I need to tell you something too." He waited, his blue-gray eyes reflecting the firelight as she gathered her thoughts. "When I started cooking in your kitchen, I thought I was helping you heal from losing your family, but somewhere along the way, I realized you were helping me heal from losing myself. I'd been so focused on building my business, on proving I could make it as a chef, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to cook for someone who appreciated not just the food, but the love behind it." Kevin's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of a gesture repeated thousands of times. "These months with you," Jennifer continued, "they've shown me that love doesn't have to be complicated or dramatic to be profound. Sometimes it's just choosing to show up for someone, day after day, meal after meal, until one day you realize you can't imagine your life without them." The storm outside seemed to intensify, wind rattling the windows and snow piling against the glass, but inside their circle of candlelight, everything felt still and perfect. "Jennifer," Kevin said, his voice careful in the way she'd learned meant he was about to say something important. "I want to ask you something, but I need you to know there's no pressure. If you're not ready, or if it feels too soon—" "Ask me," Jennifer interrupted gently. Kevin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly as he held it between them. "This isn't Sarah's ring," he said quickly. "I would never ask you to wear someone else's symbol of love. This is specifically for you, chosen because it reminded me of your strength and your warmth and the way you've brought color back into my life." Jennifer's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, the deep blue stone catching the firelight like captured starlight. "Jennifer Renee Bennett," Kevin said, his voice steadying as he spoke, "will you marry me? Will you help me build a life that honors what we've both lost while celebrating what we've found together?" The proposal hung in the air between them, perfect in its simplicity and honesty. No grand gestures or elaborate speeches, just a man who'd learned to love again asking a woman who'd taught him how to live again to be his partner in all the ordinary, extraordinary moments to come. Yes, Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Kevin, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Jennifer realized that some love stories weren't about finding your missing piece, but about discovering that you were already whole and choosing to build something beautiful with someone who was whole too. The lights flickered back on just as Kevin kissed her, the house coming back to life around them, as if celebrating their decision to choose love over fear, hope over grief, the future over the past. But they barely noticed the return of electricity. In the warm glow of the fire they'd built together, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd been creating one shared meal at a time, Jennifer and Kevin had already found all the light they needed. As 1 year later, the early morning light filtered through the kitchen windows of their Beacon Hill home, not Kevin's house or Jennifer's space, but truly theirs now, as Jennifer hummed softly while preparing breakfast. The kitchen that had once been a sterile showpiece now bore the comfortable signs of daily use. Spice containers with Jennifer's handwritten labels, a coffee maker that actually got used every morning, and photographs held to the refrigerator by magnets from their honeymoon in New Orleans. Kevin appeared in the doorway, already dressed for his morning run along the Charles River, a habit he'd recently resumed after Jennifer had gently suggested that some of his old rituals might be worth reclaiming. His wedding ring caught the morning light, a simple gold band that he wore openly now, Sarah's ring having found its place in a memory box upstairs rather than hidden against his heart. "Smells incredible," he said, kissing Jennifer's temple as she flipped what appeared to be the most perfect pancakes in the history of breakfast. "Lemon ricotta," Jennifer replied, leaning into his embrace, "with that blueberry compote you love. Though I have to warn you, I may have gotten a little experimental with the spice blend." "I trust your experiments," Kevin said, stealing a piece of bacon from the plate beside the stove. "Remember the first time you made me that experimental jerk chicken? I thought I was going to die from the heat, but I couldn't stop eating it." Jennifer laughed, the sound still capable of transforming Kevin's entire expression. "You were so polite about it too. This has interesting complexity, Jennifer. I knew right then that you were either incredibly diplomatic or completely smitten." "Both," Kevin admitted without hesitation. "Definitely both." As they settled at the kitchen island with their breakfast, the morning routine they'd developed over the past year unfolded with comfortable familiarity. Kevin read her highlights from the medical journals he subscribed to. Jennifer shared her plans for the catering events scheduled for the week. But underneath the ordinary conversation, there was something new, an excitement they'd been holding close for the past few days. "So," Jennifer said carefully, cutting her pancakes with more precision than they required, "Dr. Martinez called yesterday with the results of my blood work." Kevin's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his medical training making him immediately alert to any health concerns. "Everything okay?" Jennifer's smile started small and grew until it transformed her entire face. "Everything's perfect. More than perfect, actually." Understanding dawned slowly across Kevin's features, followed by something that looked like wonder mixed with terror. "Jennifer," he breathed. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, her voice soft with awe at the words she was speaking for the first time. 8 weeks along, due in October. Kevin set down his fork and stared at her, processing information that felt too large and precious to be real. They'd talked about children, of course, carefully, hypothetically, acknowledging that while they both wanted to expand their family, the timing and their ages meant there were no guarantees. "A baby," Kevin repeated, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. "Are you okay?" Jennifer asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we said we'd keep trying, but now that it's actually happening..." Kevin stood abruptly and crossed to her side of the island, taking her face in his hands, with the gentle precision of someone who understood exactly how precious and fragile life could be. "I'm terrified," he admitted honestly, "and grateful, and so completely in love with you that I can barely breathe thinking about creating a person who's part of both of us." Jennifer felt tears she hadn't expected prick at the corners of her eyes. "I'm scared too. After what happened to Marcus, I know you must be thinking..." "I'm thinking," Kevin interrupted gently, "that this baby is incredibly lucky to have you as a mother. I'm thinking that we're going to love them so fiercely and completely that they'll never doubt they're wanted. And I'm thinking that Marcus would be so excited to have a little brother or sister." As if summoned by their conversation, Kevin's phone buzzed with a text from his sister-in-law. "Sarah's niece Emma just got accepted to culinary school. She says she wants to be a chef like Uncle Kevin's wife. Sarah would be so proud of the woman you chose." Kevin showed Jennifer the message, and they both understood the blessing it represented. Not just approval from Sarah's family, but recognition that love could expand rather than replace, that honoring the past didn't require refusing the future. "We should call Gabrielle," Jennifer said, wiping her eyes. "She's going to scream so loud they'll hear her in Connecticut." "We should call Dr. Mack too," Kevin added. "He's been dropping hints about wanting to be a grandfather figure for months now." As they finished breakfast, making lists of people to tell and things to plan, Jennifer marveled at how seamlessly their joy incorporated the love they carried for people who weren't there to share it. This baby would grow up hearing stories about Uncle Marcus and Aunt Sarah, would understand that families could be built from both presence and memory, loss and love, intertwined in ways that made everything stronger rather than more fragile. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Jennifer went into labor during the prep for the Hendersons' anniversary party. Kevin, in true neurosurgeon fashion, remained calm and methodical right up until they arrived at Mass General, at which point he became the most anxious, expectant father the delivery team had ever seen. "I perform brain surgery," he kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "I should be better at this." "Different kind of surgery, baby," Jennifer managed between contractions, still finding the energy to tease him. "This one requires patience, not precision." 8 hours later, Sophia Marie Thaddeus entered the world with her father's determined expression and her mother's powerful lungs, announcing her arrival with the kind of cry that suggested she had opinions about everything and planned to share them. Kevin held his daughter for the first time with the careful wonder of someone who understood exactly how miraculous and fragile new life could be. But instead of the paralyzing fear he'd expected, he felt only overwhelming gratitude for Jennifer's strength, for this perfect tiny person who was entirely theirs, for the unexpected grace of getting to be a father again. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She looks like you." "She has your stubborn chin," Jennifer replied, exhausted but radiant. "And look at those hands, definitely surgeon hands." As evening settled around their hospital room, Kevin sat beside Jennifer's bed with Sophia sleeping peacefully in his arms, both of them watching their daughter with the fascination of people who'd witnessed an actual miracle. "Do you think they would have liked her?" Jennifer asked quietly, the "they" needing no explanation. Kevin considered the question seriously, looking down at his daughter's perfect tiny features. Marcus would have been the most devoted big brother in history. He would have taught her about dinosaurs and made sure she always felt protected. And Sarah, Kevin paused, his voice softening. "Sarah would have loved how much she looks like you. She would have said that Sophia got the best of both of us." Jennifer reached over to touch her daughter's tiny fist, marveling at the strength in such small fingers. "I love that she'll grow up in a house where we talk about them, where love doesn't end just because people do." As night fell over Boston, the Charles River reflecting city lights like scattered stars, the Thaddeus family, all three of them, settled into their first evening together. Jennifer dozed fitfully, still recovering from labor. Kevin kept watch over both his girls, occasionally touching Sophia's hand to reassure himself that she was real, that this happiness was something he was allowed to keep. From the window, he could see the lights of Beacon Hill, including the warm glow from their kitchen, where tomorrow he would watch Jennifer teach their daughter about the magic of turning simple ingredients into something that tasted like love. The house that had once been a monument to loss had become the foundation for a future none of them could have imagined. Love, Kevin realized, wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about learning to carry everything, grief and joy, memory and hope, the people who stayed and the people who had to go, in a heart large enough to hold it all without breaking. And as his daughter's tiny fingers curled around his thumb with surprising strength, Kevin understood that some stories end not with the dramatic resolution of all conflicts, but with the quiet recognition that life, in all its complicated beauty, was still worth choosing again and again. "We're going to see a doctor, sweetheart," he said, already wrapping her in her favorite fleece blanket, the one with tiny rockets and stars. "Can you hold onto my neck?" She nodded weakly, her small arms circling him as he lifted her. The familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, mixed with the metallic tang of fever, made his throat tight. 3 years of single parenthood had taught him many things, but the fear never got easier. The drive to Burlington Community Hospital was a blur of windshield wipers and streetlights. Thomas kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Nellie doze fitfully in her booster seat. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, a nervous habit he thought he'd broken years ago. The emergency room was eerily quiet when they arrived, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A tired-looking nurse took Nellie's temperature and vitals, her efficiency both reassuring and impersonal. "The pediatrician on call will see you shortly," she said, leading them to an examination room that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Thomas sat in the vinyl chair beside the examination bed, Nellie curled against his chest. Her favorite stuffed giraffe, worn threadbare from years of love, dangled from her limp fingers. He checked his watch, 2:43 a.m. The sound of footsteps approached in the hallway, and he prepared himself for another stranger's hands on his daughter. The door opened. Time, that faithless companion, chose that moment to play its cruelest trick. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Lyle." The voice stopped abruptly. Thomas looked up, and 13 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled in an instant. Amaris Lyle stood in the doorway, her white coat pristine even at this ungodly hour. Her hair was pulled back in neat braids, exactly as he remembered, though there were a few silver strands now catching the harsh overhead light. She held a tablet, in hands that he once knew better than his own, and her dark eyes, those eyes that had haunted him through a marriage and widowhood, went wide with recognition. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then Nellie coughed, and professionalism slammed back into place like a shield. Amaris stepped forward, her face composed into what Thomas realized must be her doctor's expression, kind but distant, concerned but controlled. "I see we have a high fever here," she said, her voice steady as she approached. If her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her stethoscope, neither of them acknowledged it. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Dr. Lyle. Can you tell me your name?" "Nellie," came the whispered response. "My head hurts really bad." "I'm going to help you feel better, Nellie." Amaris's tone was gentle, but she didn't look at Thomas. "Can you sit up for me? I need to listen to your chest." Thomas helped Nellie into a sitting position, acutely aware of every inch of space between himself and Amaris. The room felt too small, too warm, too full of unspoken words. The examination was thorough and professional. Amaris checked Nellie's throat, ears and lymph nodes, her touch confident and gentle. She asked questions about symptoms and onset, and Thomas answered mechanically, trying not to notice how her voice still had that slight lilt when she was concentrating. "It appears to be a severe viral infection," Amaris said finally, addressing her words to Nellie's medical chart rather than Thomas. "The fever is concerning, and I'd like to run some blood work to rule out anything more serious. We'll start her on IV fluids and fever reducers. Will it hurt?" Nellie clutched her giraffe tighter. Something flickered across Amaris's face, a softness that made Thomas's chest ache. "Just a tiny pinch, brave girl. And you know what? I have some special Band-Aids with rockets on them. They match your blanket." Nellie managed a weak smile, and Thomas saw it, the moment Amaris's professional mask slipped just slightly. She had always loved children. That was one of the first things he'd learned about her, back when they were younger and the world seemed simpler. The next hour passed in a parade of nurses, needle sticks. Nellie was brave, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, and the steady drip of IV fluids. Through it all, Amaris moved in and out of the room with practiced efficiency, checking vitals and adjusting medications. She and Thomas performed an elaborate dance of not quite meeting each other's eyes. Finally, Nellie drifted off to sleep, her fever dropping slowly but steadily. The room grew quiet except for the soft beep of monitors and the persistent rain outside. "I'll need a full medical history," Amaris said, still looking at her tablet. "Any chronic conditions, previous hospitalizations, allergies?" Amaris. Her name felt both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. She stilled, her finger hovering over the screen. For a moment he thought she wouldn't respond. Then slowly she looked up. 13 years had changed them both. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes now, and a certain weightiness to her presence that came with experience and hard-won wisdom. But her eyes, God help him, her eyes were exactly the same. Deep brown with flecks of gold, currently filled with a maelstrom of emotions he couldn't quite read. "Now isn't the time, Thomas." Her voice was low, professional, but he heard the tremor she tried to hide. Your daughter is my patient. That's what matters right now. He nodded, throat tight. I know, I just don't. The word was soft, but final. She straightened, adjusting her coat with practiced precision. The nurse will be in shortly to check her vitals. Try to get some rest. The chair reclines. She turned to leave, her steps measured and controlled. At the door she paused, hand on the handle. For a moment Thomas thought she might say something else. Instead she took a deep breath and walked out, leaving him alone with the steady drip of the IV and the weight of all their unspoken words. Thomas looked down at Nellie, her small face peaceful in sleep. The rocket band-aid on her arm was exactly like the ones on her blanket. Such a small detail, such a piercing reminder of the woman Amaris had always been. Thoughtful, caring. The kind of person who would remember a scared child's blanket and match it with a band-aid, even at 3 in the morning. He leaned back in the chair, listening to the rain and his daughter's steady breathing. Somewhere in this hospital, Amaris was probably writing in Nellie's chart, her handwriting still neat despite the hour. He wondered if she still bit her lower lip when concentrating, if she still took her coffee with 2 sugars but no cream, if she ever thought about... No. He couldn't go down that road. Not now. Not when Nellie needed him focused and present. But as the night crept toward dawn, Thomas Merrick sat in the semi-darkness of room 204, knowing with bone-deep certainty that his carefully ordered world had just shifted on its axis. And somewhere down the quiet hospital corridors, a pediatrician with kind eyes and careful hands was probably thinking the same thing. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of a Vermont autumn night, bringing with it the promise, or perhaps the threat, of change. Morning arrived at Burlington Community Hospital like a timid guest, pale sunlight creeping through the Venetian blinds of room 204. Thomas blinked awake, his neck stiff from the reclining chair, to find Nellie watching him with fever-bright eyes. The sun made a rainbow on the wall, she whispered, pointing to where the light refracted through her IV tube. Her voice was hoarse, but stronger than it had been at midnight. Small mercies. So it did, sweetheart. Thomas checked his watch. 7:13 a.m. He dozed off sometime after 5, after the night nurse's last check. How are you feeling? Still hot, but not as dizzy. Nellie clutched her giraffe closer. Daddy, is Dr. Lyle coming back? The question hung in the air like morning mist. Thomas rubbed his jaw, feeling yesterday's stubble beneath his fingers. I expect so. She's your doctor. I like her. She smells like vanilla and Band-Aids. Nellie's observation was so innocently precise that Thomas had to swallow hard. He remembered that vanilla scent, Amaris's signature lotion, a small luxury she'd allowed herself even during her residency years. A knock at the door interrupted his dangerous train of thought, but instead of Amaris, a younger nurse entered, her scrubs decorated with cartoon penguins. Good morning, I'm Nurse Kelly. Time to check our patient's vitals. As the nurse worked, Thomas excused himself to use the bathroom down the hall. He splashed cold water on his face, studying his reflection in the harsh fluorescent light. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled from the chair. He looked exactly like what he was, a worried father who'd spent the night in a hospital room. But it wasn't just worry etching lines around his eyes. Seeing Amaris again had cracked something open inside him, something he'd sealed away years ago alongside engagement rings and possibilities. The hallway was beginning to stir with morning activity when he stepped out. A food cart rattled past, the smell of hospital coffee making his stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch at the garage, where he'd been elbow-deep in a transmission repair before Nellie's school called. Mr. Merrick, he turned. Amaris stood at the nurse's station, a fresh white coat covering dark blue scrubs. Her braids were slightly looser than last night, as if she'd managed to catch a few hours of sleep and hadn't redone them. The sight made his chest tight. How many mornings had he watched her rebraid her hair, her fingers moving with practiced grace? Dr. Lyle. He managed to keep his voice steady. Professional. as if they were strangers who hadn't once shared dreams over coffee and winter sunrises. Nellie's blood work came back. She held up a tablet, all business. "Would you step into my office? We should discuss the results." He followed her down the corridor, hyper-aware of the space between them. Her office was small but orderly, with children's drawings taped to one wall and medical reference books lining another. No personal photos, he noticed. No hints of a life outside these walls. "Please sit." She gestured to a chair across from her desk, then closed the door. The click of the latch felt impossibly loud. Instead of sitting behind her desk, Amaris leaned against it, crossing her arms. "The good news is it's not bacterial meningitis, which was my primary concern, given her symptoms. However," she paused, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. "Thomas, when was the last time Nellie had a full checkup?" The question carried weight beyond medical necessity. 6 months ago. Dr. Reynolds, over in Essex Junction." "And her medical history? Any chronic conditions I should know about?" "No, she's healthy, just—" He ran a hand through his hair. "She gets fevers sometimes, like her mother did." The word hung between them like smoke. Amaris's fingers tightened. On her tablet, "I didn't know it was about your wife, I'm sorry. 3 years ago. Car accident on Route 15. The words were mechanical now, worn smooth from repetition. "Black ice. Nellie was at my mother's that weekend." Amaris nodded slowly, and he saw genuine grief in her eyes. That was the thing about Amaris. Every emotion was real, even when it hurt. "Nellie will need to stay another day for observation. Her white blood cell count is elevated, and I want to monitor her fever pattern. We'll move her to pediatrics this morning." "Thank you." He stood, needing to move, to do something with the energy thrumming under his skin. "For taking care of her, for being thorough." "It's my job, Thomas." "Is it?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. "Taking the night shift in the ER when you could be at any private practice in New England." A flash of something, anger, hurt, crossed her face. "Some of us choose to stay where we're needed most." Her voice was controlled, but he heard the years of accumulated pride and purpose behind it. The ER rotation is part of that choice. He took a step toward her desk, then stopped himself. "Amaris, about what happened." "Don't!" She straightened, professional distance snapping back into place. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever explanation you think I need to hear 13 years later, save it. Right now I'm Nellie's doctor, that's all. And after?" "After?" She almost smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "After, you'll take your daughter home and I'll be here doing my job, just like I have been since you left." The words hit like a physical blow. Before he could respond, her office phone rang. 3 sharp bursts that made them both jump. "You should get back to Nellie," Amaris said, reaching for the phone. "The pediatric team will be by soon to arrange the transfer." He wanted to say more. Wanted to explain about the pregnancy test he'd found in Claire's bathroom drawer that morning 13 years ago. About the impossible choice he'd thought he had to make. Wanted to tell her that he'd followed her career from afar, reading about her work in community medicine, pride and regret warring in his chest with each article. Instead, he nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "You still wear vanilla lotion?" Her hand stilled on the phone. For a heartbeat, the professional mask cracked completely, showing something raw and uncertain beneath. Then she lifted the receiver, and the moment shattered like frost. Thomas walked back to room 204, where Nellie was attempting to eat hospital toast and telling Nurse Kelly about her giraffe's adventures. The morning sun had risen fully now, turning the rain-washed windows into mirrors. Somewhere in the hospital a baby was crying. An orderly wheeled past with clean linens. Life continued its steady rhythm. But in a small office down the hall, a pediatrician sat at her desk, one hand pressed against her throat where a subtle vanilla scent lingered, wondering how many more times her heart could break in the same exact way. And in room 204, Thomas Merrick watched his daughter nibble on toast, knowing with crushing certainty that he'd made the right choice 13 years ago, and that he'd regret it for the rest of his life. The pediatric ward occupied the hospital's east wing, where large windows caught the morning light. As they wheeled Nellie's bed through the corridors, Thomas noticed how different it felt from the emergency room's stark efficiency. Here constellation decals dotted the ceiling tiles, and murals of woodland creatures played along the walls. "Look, Daddy," Nellie whispered, pointing upward. "That's the Big Dipper, like in my astronomy book." Thomas squeezed her hand, marveling at how she could find wonder even while tethered to an IV pole. The orderly pushing her bed, his name tag read Curtis, smiled. "Smart kid you've got there. Most folks just see random stars." Room 317 was painted a soft yellow that reminded Thomas of early spring. 2 chairs sat by the window, more comfortable looking than the ER recliner that had left his back aching. A small whiteboard hung on the wall, where someone had already written Nellie M in purple marker, surrounded by tiny stars. "Those are Dr. Lyle's stars," Curtis said as he helped transfer Nellie to the new bed. "She always adds them for the kids, says everyone needs their own constellation." Thomas busied himself arranging Nellie's things, her giraffe, the rocket blanket, the small overnight bag his mother had dropped off an hour ago. He tried not to think about Amaris drawing stars around his daughter's name, tried not to remember how she used to sketch constellations in the margins of her medical school notes. "Daddy," Nellie's voice was small, "can you read to me?" He pulled out the book his mother had packed, The House at Pooh Corner, worn from years of bedtime readings. "Of course, sweetheart. Should we start where we left off?" Before he could open the book, a knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a tall man in scrubs with salt and pepper hair. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Preston, head of pediatrics, and this is Nurse Whitman. We'll be part of Nellie's care team." Thomas shook their hands, noting their efficient movements as they checked Nellie's charts and vitals. Dr. Preston had a gentle manner that put Nellie at ease, showing her his stethoscope's Mickey Mouse cover before listening to her chest. "Dr. Lyle's notes are very thorough," Dr. Preston said, reviewing the tablet. "She'll be consulting on the case, of course. Speaking of—" he glanced at his watch. "She should be here shortly for rounds." As if summoned by her name, Amaris appeared in the doorway. She'd pulled her braids back into a neat bun, and Thomas noticed she'd changed into fresh scrubs, deep green this time. Their eyes met briefly before she turned her attention to Nellie. "Hello again, brave girl. How are you?" "Liking your new room?" Nellie brightened visibly. "It has stars. Curtis said you drew them." "Indeed I did." Amaris moved to the bed, her smile genuine. "Every patient needs their own piece of sky. Now let's see how that fever's doing." Thomas watched as she examined Nellie, her movements both professional and tender. She had a way of explaining medical terms that made them less frightening. Fever became your body's warrior system working extra hard, and the IV was your special hydration helper. "The morning labs show improvement," she told Dr. Preston, "but I'm concerned about the persistence of her fever pattern. I'd like to run a few more tests, rule out any underlying factors." They discussed medical details that made Thomas's head spin, but he caught the essential message. Nellie wasn't out of the woods yet. His daughter seemed to sense this too, clutching her giraffe tighter. "Will you be my doctor here too?" Nellie asked Amaris, interrupting the medical discussion. A loaded silence filled the room. Thomas held his breath, watching Amaris's face. "Dr. Preston is your main doctor now," she said gently. "But yes, I'll be checking on you too. We work as a team. Here? Good?" Nellie yawned. "You smell nice, like Mommy's cookies." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Claire had always baked vanilla cookies, filling their house with that same sweet scent that Amaris carried. He saw Amaris stiffen slightly, saw the quick glance she couldn't help throwing his way. "I think someone needs rest," Nurse Whitman intervened smoothly. "How about we get you comfortable?" As the medical team prepared to leave, Amaris lingered by Nellie's bedside, adjusting the blanket with careful hands. "Try to sleep, brave girl. I'll check on you later." In the doorway, she paused. "Mr. Merrick? A word?" Thomas followed her into the hallway, where morning light streamed through large windows. They stood in a patch of sun, and for a moment he was struck by how it caught the subtle silver strands in her braids, how it softened the professional lines of her face. "She mentioned her mother," Amaris said quietly. Does she remember her well? The question caught him off guard, not just its content, but the genuine concern in Amaris's voice. She was 3 when Claire died. The memories are more like impressions now, sense, feelings. Amaris nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Children process grief differently than adults. Sometimes it surfaces in unexpected ways, especially during illness when they're feeling vulnerable. She hesitated. If you need resources, support groups. We're managing. The words came out sharper than he intended. But thank you. Of course. Professional distance settled over her features again. I'll be back for evening rounds. Try to get her to drink more fluids. She turned to leave, but Thomas caught the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her tablet. Without thinking, he spoke. Amaris. She stopped but didn't turn around. The vanilla scent. Claire's cookies. I never made the connection before. Now she did turn, and for a moment he saw past the doctor to the woman he'd known 13 years ago, the one who believed in healing more than medicine, in stars more than science. Some connections, she said softly, are better left unmade. She walked away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Thomas watched until she turned the corner, then returned to Nellie's room. His daughter had dozed off, the book of Pooh still unopened in his lap. Outside the window, morning. Clouds gathered, promising more Vermont rain. Thomas settled into one of the chairs, watching Nellie sleep, thinking about vanilla cookies and star patterns and the way some scents could bridge 13 years of silence. On the whiteboard, Amaris's purple stars twinkled around his daughter's, name forming a constellation of their own, one that mapped paths he'd thought long closed, leading to places he'd tried so hard to forget. Late afternoon sun painted long shadows across room 317's floor when Thomas's phone buzzed. A text from his garage manager read, Henderson's transmission ready for pickup. Everything okay with the kid? Thomas glanced at Nellie, who was finally eating small bites of turkey sandwich between sips of apple juice. Her fever had dropped to 101.2 degree, still concerning but better than the morning's readings. She'd spent most of the day drifting between fitful sleep and quiet periods of drawing with the crayons a nurse had brought. Need to make a quick call, sweetheart, he said, stepping into the hallway. I'll be right outside the door. Reed answered. On the first ring. Boss, how's our girl? Hanging in there. Thomas leaned against the wall, watching nurses move efficiently between rooms. They want to keep her another day at least. Listen, about the Henderson job. Already handled. Told him his car's ready, but you're dealing with family emergency. He was cool about it. Reed paused. Shop's running fine, Thomas. Your mum stopped by, helped with the paperwork. Take care of Nellie. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, grateful for his small but loyal team. The garage had been his father's legacy, and now it supported not just his family but 4 other households. Thanks, Reed. I'll check in tomorrow. Ending the call, he turned to find Amaris approaching, tablet in hand. She wore a different white coat now, this one embroidered with Pediatric Department above her name. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Work calling? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. The garage, checking on things. Something flickered across her face. You took over your father's business. 5 years ago. He didn't add that it was right after his father's heart attack, another loss in the string of them. Still on Monroe Street. I know. At his surprised look, she added quickly, It's a small town, Thomas. Hard to miss American Sons when I drive past. Before he could respond, a young nurse hurried up. Dr. Lyle, we need you in 322. Jimmy's fever's spiking again. I'll be right there. To Thomas, she said, I need to check Nellie's latest labs anyway. Give me 15 minutes? He nodded, watching her follow the nurse down the hall. Even in crisis, her movements were graceful, purposeful. Some things hadn't changed. Back in the room, Nellie had finished half her sandwich and was drawing again. Thomas recognized her current artwork, the garage's facade, complete with the faded red brick and the old sign his father had hand-painted decades ago. That's really good, sweetheart, he said, settling beside her. You got the colors just right. It's for Dr. Lyle. Nellie added careful details to the garage doors. She asked what you did, and I told her about fixing cars. She said that was very important work. Thomas's chest tightened. Of course Amaris would say that. She'd always respected practical work, had grown up watching her professor parents dismiss blue-collar jobs while she defended their value. When she returned 14 minutes later, not that he was counting, Amaris carried not just her tablet but also a paper cup of what smelled like honey lemon tea. This might feel good on your throat, Nellie. Nurse's special recipe. While Nellie sipped carefully, Amaris reviewed the latest readings on the monitors. Temperature's improving, but slower than I'd like. Blood pressure's good, though. She made notes, then noticed the drawing. Is that your daddy's garage? Nellie nodded, holding out the paper. It's for you. See, I drew the special red bricks. Thomas watched Amaris accept the drawing, saw how carefully she held it. Her fingers traced the childish rendering of the sign, and for a moment, her professional mask slipped. This is wonderful, Nellie. Thank you. She looked at the details with genuine interest. You know, I drive past this garage sometimes. The old sign always makes me think of... She caught herself glancing at Thomas. It's a landmark in town. Daddy lets me draw with chalk in the empty bay when it's rainy, Nellie said, oblivious to the tension. And sometimes Reed gives me sugar packets from his coffee for my tea parties. Reed still works there. Amaris's question seemed to surprise even her. He never left. Thomas met her eyes. Some people stick with what they believe in. The words hung between them, heavy, with meaning. Amaris's fingers tightened on the drawing slightly, creating small creases she quickly tried to smooth out. Speaking of belief, she said, her voice deliberately light, I believe it's time for your evening medications, Nellie. And then maybe your daddy could read you some more of that book I saw earlier. Pooh Bear, Nellie brightened. We're at the part where they're looking for Eeyore's tail. Ah, a classic mission, Amaris smiled, but Thomas saw the strain around her eyes. I'll have Nurse Whitman bring your medicine. Try to finish that tea, brave girl. It'll help you sleep. She turned to leave, still holding Nellie's drawing. At the door, she paused. Thomas, a word? In the hallway, the evening shift was beginning, bringing a different rhythm to the ward. Amaris led him to a small consultation room, closing the door against the hospital sounds. Her fever pattern concerns me, she said, all business now. I'd like to run one more series of tests tomorrow morning, rule out some underlying factors. Whatever she needs, Amaris nodded, then seemed to remember the drawing in her hand. Oh, I should give this back. Keep it. The word surprised them both. She made it for you. Their fingers brushed as she pulled the paper back, and Thomas felt the same jolt. He'd always felt at her touch. 13 years hadn't changed that, at least. I should check on Jimmy in 322, she said softly. Try to get some rest, Thomas. There's a fold-out cot in Nellie's room. Better than these chairs. She left him standing in the consultation room, the scent of vanilla lingering in the air. Through the window, he could see the sun setting behind Burlington's modest skyline, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. When he returned to room 317, Nellie was already drowsy from her medicine, Pooh Bear waiting patiently on her lap. Daddy, do you think Dr. Lyle will hang my drawing in her office, like my pictures at home? Thomas thought of Amaris's office wall, covered in children's artwork. Thought of how carefully she'd held Nellie's drawing, how her fingers had traced the old garage sign. I think she'll find the perfect spot for it, sweetheart. Later that night, after Nellie had fallen asleep to stories of the 100-acre wood, Thomas stood at the window watching Burlington's lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere in this hospital, a pediatrician was probably looking at a crayon drawing of a garage, remembering summer evenings spent on a worn wooden bench outside that same building, sharing dreams that had seemed so possible then. And in her sleep, Nellie smiled, dreaming perhaps of honeypots and lost tales, unaware that her simple gift had cracked open another piece of her father's carefully guarded heart. Morning rounds brought unwelcome news. Thomas stood by Nellie's bed, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder as Dr. Preston delivered the update. The latest blood work shows elevated inflammatory markers, he explained, gesturing to charts, on his tablet. Dr. Lyle's suspicions were correct. There's something we're missing." Nellie dozed fitfully, her cheeks flushed with fever despite the medications. The overnight nurse had braided her hair into 2 neat plaits to keep it off her neck, making her look even smaller against the hospital pillows. "What's the next step?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. "We'd like to do an MRI. Dr. Preston's tone was gentle but firm. Dr. Lyle suggested it might help us identify any underlying inflammation. She'll be here shortly to explain the procedure." As if conjured by her name, Amaris appeared in the doorway. She looked tired, her usual crisp appearance slightly softened around the edges. Thomas wondered if she'd gone home at all last night. "I hear my patient's being stubborn," she said, moving to Nellie's bedside. The girl stirred at her voice, blinking owlishly. "Dr. Lyle." Nellie's voice was scratchy. "I don't feel good." "I know, brave girl." Amaris pressed her palm to Nellie's forehead, a gesture so maternal it made Thomas's chest ache. "That's why we're going to take some special pictures of you today, like an adventure into space with a big machine that looks like a spaceship." Nellie's eyes widened. "A real spaceship?" "Well, it makes sounds like one." Amaris smiled, but Thomas caught the worry in her eyes. "We'll even give you special headphones to wear, just like an astronaut." After Dr. Preston left, Amaris stayed to explain the procedure to Thomas. Her voice was professional, but he noticed how she kept one hand near Nellie's, offering silent comfort. "The MRI will take about 40 minutes, she said. "One of us will be monitoring the entire time. We've scheduled it for—" She checked her watch, a simple silver piece he remembered giving her for her medical school graduation. His throat tightened. She still wore it. 2 hours, she continued, apparently unaware of his reaction. "Nothing to eat or drink until then. I know it's hard, but—" "My throat hurts," Nellie whimpered, interrupting them. Amaris's response was immediate. She reached for the cooling cloth by the bed, gently dabbing Nellie's face and neck. "I know, sweetheart. After the pictures, we'll get you something cold to drink. Maybe some of that purple popsicle I saw in the nurse's freezer." Thomas watched, them struck by how natural they looked together. Amaris had always been good with children. It was why she'd chosen pediatrics. But this was different. This was his daughter, and somehow that made it both better and infinitely more complicated. "I should call my mother," he said, needing a moment to collect himself. "Update her." Amaris nodded, still focused on Nellie. "Use the consultation. Room down the hall. More privacy." The consultation room was empty, morning sun streaming through its single window. Thomas pulled out his phone, but instead of calling immediately, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. A soft knock made him turn. Amaris stood in the doorway, hesitating. "Sorry. I thought you'd want to know. Nellie's asking for her mother's photo, the one in your wallet." The request hit him like a physical blow. Nellie rarely asked to see Claire's picture anymore. She must be really scared. "It's normal." Amaris stepped into the room, letting the door close behind her. Children often seek comfort in memories when they're feeling vulnerable. Even memories they're not sure are real. Thomas pulled out his wallet, carefully extracting the worn photograph. Claire smiled up at them, forever frozen in a summer moment 3 months before the accident. She sat on their porch swing, laughing at something, off camera. "She was beautiful," Amaris said softly. "She was kind." The words came unbidden. "You would have liked her." A loaded silence filled the room. Finally, Amaris spoke. "I've treated hundreds of children, Thomas, but watching your daughter fight this fever—" She trailed off, pressing her fingers to her throat, an old nervous habit he remembered well. "Amaris, don't." But her voice lacked its usual professional distance. "I need to maintain boundaries, for Nellie's sake, for everyone's sake." "You're wearing the watch." Her hand dropped from her throat to the silver timepiece. "It's a good watch. It was your graduation gift, and now it's just a watch." But her fingers traced its face gently. "Like that garage is just a building, and vanilla is just a scent, and all those stars we used to—" She stopped abruptly. "Nellie needs her mother's photo." She held out her hand, and Thomas placed the photograph in her palm. Their fingers didn't touch, but somehow the near miss felt more intimate than contact. "I'll make sure she gets it back to you before the MRI, she said, her professional mask slipping back into place. "You should call your mother." She turned to leave, but at the door she paused. "Thomas? That summer day, in the photo. Claire. Looks happy, at peace, hold on to that." Before he could respond, she was gone, taking Claire's photograph and the scent of vanilla with her. Thomas stared at the empty doorway, remembering another summer day, 13 years ago, when he'd made a choice that had seemed right at the time. Now watching Amaris care for his daughter, seeing her wear his graduation gift like an unconscious habit, he wondered if there was such a thing as a right choice when it came to matters of the heart. His phone buzzed, his mother calling him. Outside the window, a pair of sparrows landed on the sill, going about their morning routine, as if nothing in the world had changed, as if his carefully constructed walls weren't crumbling a little more with each passing hour, as if somewhere down the hall, a pediatrician wasn't looking at a photograph of his late wife while wearing the watch he'd given her when they thought forever was possible. The MRI department occupied the hospital's basement level, all fluorescent lights and pale green walls. Thomas carried Nellie in his arms, her rocket blanket wrapped around her hospital gown, as they followed the technician down the quiet corridor. "Remember what Dr. Lyle said," he murmured into her hair. "It's like a spaceship adventure." Nellie clutched her giraffe tighter. "Will you stay with me?" "Right until they start taking pictures, sweetheart. Then I'll be just outside watching. The whole time." The MRI room was dominated by the massive machine, its circular opening like a portal to another world. Nellie's eyes went wide at the sight, her fingers digging into Thomas's shirt. "Look what we have here." Amaris's voice came from behind them, and Thomas turned to find her holding something in her hands. "Special astronaut headphones, just for you, and see, I added some stars." Sure enough, she decorated the protective headphones with glow-in-the-dark star stickers. The simple gesture made Thomas's throat tight. How many children had she comforted this way? How many small fears had she eased with such thoughtful details? "Pretty," Nellie whispered, reaching for them. The technician, whose name tag read Marlene, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Should we try them on? They'll protect your ears from the spaceship sounds." While Marlene explained the procedure in child-friendly terms, Amaris moved closer to Thomas. "We'll be monitoring everything," she said softly. "Dr. Preston's reviewing the morning labs now, but I wanted to be here for this." He nodded, unable to speak past the gratitude in his throat. She didn't have to be here. This was technically Dr. Preston's case now, but here she was adding stars to headphones at 7 in the morning. "Okay, brave girl," Marlene said. "Time to lie down. Dad can stay until we're ready to start." Thomas helped Nellie onto the narrow bed, tucking the rocket blanket around her legs. "Remember what we practiced, staying super still like a statue." "Like when we play freeze tag with Reed," Nellie said, managing a small smile. "Exactly like that?" He kissed her forehead, noting how warm it still felt. "I'll be right outside watching, Dr. Lyle too." "Promise?" "Promise," Amaris answered before he could, stepping forward to adjust the headphones. "And guess what? These stars glow in the dark, so even when we dim the lights, you'll have your own little constellation." Eventually, they had to step out, leaving Nellie lying small and brave on the MRI bed. In the control room, Thomas watched through the observation window as the machine hummed to life. Marlene's voice came through the intercom, gentle and encouraging. "You're doing great, Nellie. Remember, it's just your spaceship taking pictures." Thomas pressed his palm against the glass, fighting the urge to rush back in and gather his daughter into his arms. He felt more than saw Amaris step up beside him. "She's handling it well," she said, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "Better than many adults. She's stronger than I am." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Amaris was quiet for a moment, watching the images start to appear on the screens. Children often are. They haven't learned to overthink things yet. The MRI's rhythmic thumping filled the room, a mechanical heartbeat counting out the minutes. Thomas found himself matching his breathing to it, the way he used to time engine repairs to the ticking of his father's old shop clock. "Thomas?" Amaris's voice was carefully neutral. "When Nellie gets sick, does she always spike fevers like this?" He turned to look at her, caught the careful way she wasn't quite meeting his eyes. Sometimes. Claire was the same way. Her mother, too, apparently. Has anyone ever tested for... She trailed off, then tried again. Some fever patterns can be hereditary. There are specialists who... We saw 3 doctors after Claire died, he interrupted quietly. They all said Nellie was healthy, just sensitive to infections like her. Mother, Amaris nodded slowly, making a note on her tablet. In the MRI chamber, Marlene was praising Nellie for staying still, promising only 10 more minutes. You kept track of us? Thomas asked suddenly. The garage, the doctors. Now she did look at him, her professional mask slipping slightly. Burlington's a small town, Thomas, and I'm a doctor who works with children. Word gets around. That's not an answer. No, she said softly. It's not. Before he could press further, Marlene's voice crackled through the intercom. Dr. Lyle, you might want to look at this. They both turned to the monitors, where ghostly images of Nellie's internal landscape appeared in grayscale. Amaris stepped closer, her finger tracing something on the screen that Thomas couldn't interpret. There, she murmured. Send that sequence. To Dr. Preston immediately. What is it? Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. Possibly nothing. But her voice held a tension he recognized from their med school days when she'd stay up late studying particularly challenging cases. Let's finish the scan, then we'll talk. The remaining minutes stretched like taffy, marked by the machine's steady rhythm and Marlene's gentle encouragement. Finally, the bed began sliding out, bringing Nellie back to them. Thomas rushed to the chamber, reaching his daughter before anyone else. She blinked up at him, brave and tired and so terribly small. Did I do good? She asked as he lifted her. So good, sweetheart. He kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair beneath the hospital antiseptic. The best astronaut ever. The stars really glowed, she whispered against his neck. Just like Dr. Lyle said. He looked up to find Amaris watching them, her face unreadable. She still held her tablet, knuckles white against its edges. Thomas, she said quietly, once Nellie's settled back in her room, we need to talk. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications. Outside the basement windows, morning sun painted strips of light across the corridor floor, reaching toward them like golden fingers. But in the windowless MRI room, under fluorescent lights that made everything stark and clear, a father held his daughter close and watched. A doctor he'd once loved study images that might change everything. And somewhere in the machine's memory, Nellie's internal stars told a story that none of them were quite ready to hear. The consultation room felt smaller in daylight. Thomas sat in one of the padded chairs, his hands clasped tightly between his knees while Dr. Preston pulled up images on the wall-mounted screen. Amaris stood by the window, her reflection ghost-like against the morning glare. The MRI showed inflammation in several lymph nodes, Dr. Preston explained, highlighting areas that meant nothing to Thomas but seemed to speak volumes to the medical professionals. Combined with her fever pattern and family history, it's not cancer. Amaris's voice was firm, catching Thomas's unspoken fear before it could fully form. But it is something we need to address. She moved away from the window, her steps measured as she approached the screen. Thomas, have you ever heard of FAPA syndrome? The unfamiliar acronym hung in the air. Thomas shook his head, watching as Amaris's fingers traced patterns on her tablet. Periodic fever, ophthalmostomatitis, pharyngitis, and adenitis, she explained, each word careful and clear. It's a periodic fever syndrome, genetic but not dangerous if properly managed. The symptoms match what you described about Claire and what we're seeing in Nellie. Thomas's mind raced back through years of high fevers, of Claire's mysterious illnesses that came and went like seasons. Claire's doctors always said it was just a sensitive immune system. Medical understanding has evolved, Dr. Preston interjected. 10 years ago, PFAPA was rarely diagnosed, but Dr. Lyle suspected it from Nellie's charts, which is why she pushed for the MRI. Thomas looked at Amaris, really looked at her. She met his gaze steadily, and he saw the weight of knowledge behind her professional exterior. You knew. When? You asked about Claire's fever patterns. I suspected. She moved closer, sitting in the chair next to his, close enough that he caught the faint vanilla scent, far enough to maintain professional distance. I've been following research on periodic fever syndromes, the pattern in Nellie's medical history, and it was familiar because you remembered Claire's symptoms. The realization hit him like a wave. From when you used to tell me about her sick days, Amaris finished softly. Yes, Dr. Preston cleared his throat gently. I'll give you a moment to process this. Dr. Lyle can explain the treatment options. He gathered his tablet and slipped out, leaving them alone with the glowing images and 13 years of unspoken words. It's manageable, Thomas finally asked. Very. Amaris's voice held the quiet confidence he remembered from their med school days. We can predict the fever cycles, prevent some episodes, reduce others. Nellie can have a completely normal life, but she'll always have it. Yes. She hesitated, then added, like Claire did. The mention of Claire's name in this context, not as a ghost between them, but as a key to understanding their daughter's health, shifted something in the room's atmosphere. If we had known then, Thomas started. Medical science moves forward. Amaris's hand moved as if to touch his arm, then pulled back. We know now. That's what matters. Through the window, they could see Burlington stirring to full morning life. A medical helicopter landed on the roof across the way, its rotors spinning autumn leaves into copper whirlwinds. There's a specialist in Boston, Amaris said, her voice taking on a carefully neutral tone. Dr. Landry, she's doing groundbreaking work with periodic fever syndromes. I want you to treat her. The words came out before Thomas could consider their implications. Amaris stilled, her hand frozen over her tablet. Thomas, you figured it out. You connected the dots that 3 other doctors missed. He struggled to find the right words. You see her, really see her. That's exactly why I shouldn't. But her voice held a tremor he recognized. Professional boundaries exist for a reason. Boundaries, he almost laughed. You were my graduation gift. You remember Claire's symptoms from conversations 13 years ago. You put glow-in-the-dark stars on MRI headphones because you knew my daughter would be scared. That's different. That's just... She stood abruptly, moving back to the window. Being thorough, being kind, being you. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, and Thomas watched her reflection close its eyes. I can't be what you're asking me to be, Thomas. Doctor, friend, whatever this is, it's too complicated. Life is complicated. He stood too, keeping his distance but facing her reflection. Claire taught me that. So did losing her. And now Nellie needs a doctor who can think clearly. Amaris turned, her professional mask slipping just enough to show the storm beneath. Not one who stays up nights reviewing old cases, because she recognized a father's description of his late wife's fever patterns. Not one who... She stopped, pressing her fingers to her throat. Not one who what? Not one who never stopped. The door opened, cutting off her words as a nurse stepped in. Dr. Lyle, the lab results you wanted for room 322 are ready. Thank you. Amaris straightened, composure flowing back like a tide. I'll be right there. To Thomas, she added, take some time to process this. We'll talk more about treatment, options this afternoon, and Thomas, she paused at the door. Call your mother. Nellie will need a support system for the hard days. She left him standing in the consultation room, surrounded by images that explained so much and solved so little. On the screen, Nellie's internal landscape glowed in shades of grey and white, a constellation of medical truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Just like other truths, he thought, watching Amaris's white coat disappear down this hallway. Just like the way she'd never finished her sentence, leaving the words hanging between them like stars waiting to be mapped. Outside, the helicopter lifted off, casting moving shadows across the room. Thomas watched it rise against the autumn sky, carrying someone else's emergency to someone else's hospital, while here, in this quiet room, his world shifted on its axis once again. But this time, the shift felt less like an ending and more like a beginning, complicated and messy and real, like all the best kinds of healing. Evening settled over Burlington Community Hospital like a soft blanket, muting the day's harsh edges. In room 317, Nellie dozed peacefully for the first time in days, her fever finally responding to the adjusted medication. Thomas sat in the window seat, watching lights flicker on across the city while his mother knitted in the chair beside him. "Just like Claire," Margaret Merrick murmured, her needles clicking softly. "All those years, and now we finally know." "Why?" Thomas nodded, remembering how his mother had arrived an hour after his call, her silver hair neat despite the rush, carrying her eternal knitting bag and decades of quiet wisdom. She'd listened to the diagnosis with the same steady calm she'd shown at Claire's funeral, at his father's hospital bed, at every crisis their family had weathered. "Did you tell Reed?" she asked, adding another row to what looked like a child-sized sweater. "Brief update. He's handling everything." Thomas rubbed his tired eyes. "The Henderson transmission, the Wilson brake job. That boy worships the ground you walk on." Margaret's needles never faltered. "Just like you did with your father." Before Thomas could respond, a knock at the door drew their attention. Amaris stood in the doorway, her white coat exchanged for a soft grey cardigan. She looked different in civilian clothes, more like the woman he'd known 13 years. Less like the doctor who'd spent the day explaining treatment protocols. "Evening rounds?" she said softly, noting Nellie's sleep. "Mrs. Merrick, it's been a long time." Margaret set her knitting aside, rising with a warm smile. "Amaris, Lyle. Still saving children and keeping odd hours, I see." Something flickered across Amaris's face, surprise perhaps at being remembered so easily. Some habits never change. "No," Margaret agreed, her knowing gaze moving between Amaris and her son. "They certainly don't." Thomas watched as Amaris checked Nellie's vitals with practiced efficiency. In sleep, his daughter turned slightly toward the doctor's touch, as if recognizing something safe and familiar. "Her fever's down to 99.8, Amaris noted, making a small adjustment to the IV flow. "The new medication protocol is working." "Thanks to you," Margaret said quietly. Amaris's hands stilled on her tablet. "I just connected the dots." "Somehow, you always did." Margaret picked up her knitting bag. "Thomas, I should head home. Early mass tomorrow and these old bones need rest." She paused by Amaris. "It's good to see you, dear. The hospital's lucky to have you." After Margaret left, a different kind of quiet filled the room. Amaris moved to check the window latch, an unnecessary gesture that Thomas recognized as her way of keeping busy when nervous. "Your mother's still beautiful," she said finally. "I remember how she used to bring soup to the garage on cold days." "She asked about you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. "After everything, she worried." Amaris turned from the window, her silhouette outlined by Burlington's evening lights. "I ran into her once, about a year after, at the farmer's market. She hugged me like nothing had changed." "Everything changed." Thomas stood, needing to move. "But some things don't." But her voice lacked conviction. "We've been through this." "Have we?" "Because I remember a lot of not talking, a lot of professional distance, a lot of unfinished sentences." She pressed her fingers to her throat, and the familiar gesture made his chest ache. "What do you want me to say, Thomas? That I recognized Claire's symptoms because I memorized every word you ever told me about her? That I requested to be Nellie's consulting physician because I couldn't bear the thought of another doctor missing something? That I—" A small sound from the bed stopped her. Nellie stirred, mumbling something about stars before settling back to sleep. Amaris moved to smooth the blanket, her hands gentle. "She has Claire's smile. Did you know that? I saw it in the photograph, but it's clearer when she's awake, the way just one side lifts first. Amaris, I should go." She straightened, professional distance flowing back like armor. "Dr. Landry, the specialist in Boston, she's expecting your call tomorrow. Shall have her office number sent up. You're really stepping away from the case. It's the right thing to do. Like last time?" The words hung between them like frost. Amaris took a sharp breath, and for a moment Thomas thought she might finally say all the things they'd left unsaid 13 years ago. Instead, she walked to the door, each step measured and careful. But there, with her hand on the handle, she paused. "Your mother," she said softly, "she told me once that love isn't always about timing. Sometimes it's about patience, about waiting for stars to align." She glanced back at Nellie's sleeping form. "She's a remarkable child, Thomas. She deserves a doctor who can see her case clearly without complications." "And what do I deserve?" The question surprised them both. Amaris's hand tightened on the door handle, and Thomas saw her reflection in the dark window, a ghost of possibility, of might-have-beens and could-be's. "Peace," she whispered. "You deserve peace." She slipped out before he could respond, leaving behind the scent of vanilla and the weight of words still unspoken. Thomas returned to the window seat, watching the city lights blur through eyes that burned with exhaustion and something else he wasn't ready to name. On the bed, Nellie sighed in her sleep, one hand reaching for her giraffe. The gesture was so like Claire's unconscious searching for her pillow that Thomas's throat tightened. But it was Amaris's words that echoed in his mind. Love isn't always about timing. Outside, Burlington settled into its evening rhythm. Somewhere in this hospital, a doctor in a grey cardigan was probably updating charts, fighting the urge to check on room 317 one more time. And somewhere in the city, Margaret Merrick's knitting needles clicked steadily, weaving patterns as complex as the hearts she'd watched grow and break and heal. Thomas leaned his forehead against the cool glass, remembering another window, another hospital, another night when everything had seemed both ending and beginning. Now, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in days, he wondered if his mother was right, if some stars took longer to align, but shone all the brighter for the waiting. Rain returned to Burlington with the dawn, drumming against the hospital windows in a steady autumn rhythm. Thomas stood in the pediatric ward's family kitchen, watching coffee drip into a paper cup, when he heard familiar footsteps behind him. "You're up early." Amaris's voice was soft, careful. He turned. She wore her white coat again, but something was different. Her braids were damp from the rain, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept. "Nellie had a rough night," he said, reaching for another cup automatically. "2 sugars, no cream." The question hung between them. Such a small thing to remember after 13 years. Amaris's fingers pressed against her throat, that telltale gesture he knew so well. "You remember." "I remember everything." He poured the second cup, adding sugar with practiced movements, like how you used to guard your coffee like it was liquid gold during residency. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. 72-hour shifts will do that. They stood in silence as rain painted patterns on the windows. Finally, Amaris spoke. "Dr. Landry can see Nellie next week. I've arranged everything. I haven't called her yet. Thomas, she's not you." The words came out rougher than he intended. "She doesn't know about Claire's symptoms, doesn't understand how Nellie processes fear through her drawings, hasn't spent hours making medical procedures feel like space adventures. That's exactly why she should be Nellie's doctor." Amaris set her untouched coffee down. "She'll see the case clearly without history clouding her judgment." "Is that what we are? Clouded judgment?" Before she could answer, running footsteps echoed down the hall. A nurse, Thomas recognized her from night shift, appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Lyle, room 317. The patient's fever's spiking again." They moved as one, coffee forgotten. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs as they rushed to Nellie's room, where monitors beeped in urgent symphony. Nellie thrashed in her bed, her cheeks flame red. "Daddy, it hurts. I'm here, sweetheart." He reached for her hand while Amaris checked vital signs with swift efficiency. 104.2, she muttered, already adjusting the IV. "This isn't just PFAPA. There's something we missed." To the nurse, she added, "Get Dr. Preston, now." The next hour blurred into a cascade of medical terms and quiet urgency. More blood draws. Another set of scans. Through it all, Thomas watched Amaris work, her movements precise, even as exhaustion lined her face. Finally, as morning shift changed to afternoon, Nellie's fever began to respond to the adjusted medications. She drifted into uneasy sleep, her small hand still clutching Thomas's fingers. "We need to talk." Amaris's voice was low, professional. In private. The consultation room felt smaller than ever. Thomas sat heavily in what he'd come to think of as his chair, while Amaris paced near the window. "The PFAPA diagnosis was correct," she said, her words measured. "But there's a secondary infection complicating things. I should have seen it earlier, should have looked deeper." "Stop!" Thomas stood, catching her mid-pace. "You're exhausted. When was the last time you slept?" She pulled away, but not before. He felt her tremble. "That's not relevant." "It is when you're treating my daughter." "I'm not treating her anymore. Dr. Preston is coordinating with Dr. Landry, and I'm running away." The words tasted bitter. "Like I did?" Amaris went still. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like urgent fingers. "That's not fair," she whispered. "None of this is fair. It wasn't fair 13 years ago when I found out Claire was pregnant and ran from the best thing in my life. It wasn't fair when Claire died and left me trying to raise our daughter alone. And it's not fair now watching you fight sleep and guilt because you care too much to step away but you're too afraid to stay." Afraid? Now she did turn, and he saw tears in her eyes. "You think this is about fear? I spent 13 years building, a life after you left. 13 years becoming the kind of doctor who puts patients first, who maintains boundaries, who doesn't let personal feelings cloud her judgment. And how's that working out?" She laughed, a broken sound. "Look at me, Thomas. I haven't slept because I've been reviewing every test result, every symptom, terrified I missed something else. I put stars on medical equipment. I remember coffee preferences from another lifetime. I keep your graduation gift on my wrist like some kind of—" She stopped, pressing both hands to her face. "Like what?" "Like a promise." The words were muffled. "A promise I made to myself that I'd never need anyone that much again." Thomas moved closer, close enough to catch the vanilla scent that had haunted his dreams for 13 years. "Amaris, don't." But she didn't step away. "Please, I can't—" "Can't what? Care? Too late. Can't stay? You never left. Not really. Can't love my daughter? Because you already do. Can't lose you again." The words burst out like breaking glass. I can't watch you walk away twice." The rain filled the silence that followed, washing the windows like tears. Somewhere in the hospital, monitors beeped and phones rang and life continued its measured pace. But in this room, time seemed to stop as Thomas reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I'm not walking anywhere." Amaris leaned into his touch for just a moment, then straightened. "Nellie needs you." He let his hand fall, but held her gaze. "She needs you, I need—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I need you to stop pretending professional distance is going to fix what breaking hearts caused." Before she could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. Dr. Preston stood in the doorway, his face grave. "The new test results are back," he said. "You both should see this." Amaris stepped away from Thomas, doctor's mask sliding back into place, but her hands shook as she reached for her tablet, and when their fingers brushed as they followed Dr. Preston out, neither pulled away. Behind them, the rain continued its steady fall, washing away autumn leaves and old fears, making room for whatever truth waited in those test results, and whatever lay beyond them, in the space where professional distance gave way to matters of the heart. The world reduced itself to the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whir of medical equipment. Thomas sat beside Nellie's bed, holding her small hand while nurses moved efficiently around them, responding to Dr. Preston's quiet orders. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, turning Burlington's lights into watercolor smudges against the evening sky. "Strep infection," Dr. Preston had explained, pointing to test results that finally told the whole story. "Hidden by the PFAPA symptoms, which is why we missed it initially. The combination triggered a cascade effect. Now watching antibiotics drip steadily into his daughter's IV, Thomas felt the weight of the past 4 days settle into his bones. Nellie slept peacefully, her fever slowly retreating, while across the room, Amaris updated charts with mechanical precision. She hadn't left even after Dr. Preston took over, hadn't stepped away even when the Boston specialist called to consult. Instead, she'd stayed, her white coat like a shield, her professional mask slipping only when she thought no one was watching. Her temperature's down to 100.1, she said now, her voice carefully neutral. The antibiotics are working. Thomas nodded, too exhausted for words. He'd been awake for nearly 30 hours, running on hospital coffee and fear, watching his daughter fight through another night of fever, while the woman he'd never stopped, loving, fought her own battles with professional boundaries and personal truth. "You should rest," Amaris added softly. "Your mother can—" "I'm not leaving." "Thomas." She set down her tablet, and for the first time in hours he saw past the doctor to the woman beneath. "You can't help her if you collapse." "Neither can you." He met her eyes. "When was the last time you slept? Really slept?" She touched her watch and his watch, an unconscious gesture. "That's not relevant," he almost smiled. "Everything's relevant now, isn't it? The watch, the vanilla lotion, the way you remember exactly how Claire's fevers presented 13 years ago because you memorized every word I said about her." "Don't. Why not? We're past professional distance, past pretending this is just another case." He looked at Nellie, at her peaceful face finally free from pain. "You found what other doctors missed because you cared enough to look deeper, because you remembered patterns from conversations 13 years old, because you never really let go. And that's exactly why I should step away." But her voice cracked. "Doctors can't. We can't let personal feelings—" "Daddy?" Nellie's small voice interrupted them. "Is Dr. Lyle leaving?" They both turned. Nellie blinked up at them, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. Amaris moved to check her vital signs, professional mask back in place, but Nellie caught her hand. "Please don't go, you make the stars glow." Something broke in Amaris's face. She sank into the chair opposite Thomas, still holding Nellie's hand. "Oh, brave girl. The stars glow all on their own." "Not like when you're here." Nellie's voice was stronger. "Daddy smiles more too, like in my drawings." Thomas watched color touch Amaris's cheeks. She'd kept every drawing Nellie had made, he knew, had pinned them carefully to her office wall, next to years of children's artwork, but somehow always at eye level. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the bravest thing we can do is stay." Amaris looked up, and in the soft evening light, he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "I don't know how 13 years of building walls, of keeping safe distances." She pressed her fingers to her throat. "I don't know how to stay without breaking every rule I made to survive losing you." "Then we make new rules." He reached across the bed, offering his hand. "Together." For a long moment she stared at his outstretched fingers. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean. Monitors beeped steadily, marking each heartbeat, each choice, each second of possibility. Finally, slowly, she placed her hand in his. "I can't be her doctor," she whispered. "Not officially, but I can be part of her life. Part of—" He squeezed her fingers gently. "Part of our lives?" Nellie shifted between them, her small face serious. "Like a constellation?" They both turned to her, surprised. Amaris smiled through her tears. "What do you mean, brave girl?" "In my astronomy book, some stars look separate, but they're really connected, making pictures in the sky." She yawned. "Like us." Thomas felt Amaris's hand tremble in his. She looked at their joined fingers, at the child who saw truth with such simple clarity, at the future cracking open before them. "Yes," she said softly. "Like a constellation." Later that night, after Nellie had drifted back to sleep and night, shift nurses had made their rounds, Thomas and Amaris stood at the window. She'd finally shed her white coat, standing close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Dr. Landry will oversee her PFAPA treatment," she said. "She's the best, but I'll be here, just not as her doctor." "As what?" She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw 13 years of love and loss and possibility. As someone who never stopped looking for your star pattern in the sky, as someone who kept your watch and your memory and your daughter's drawings because letting go was harder than holding on. She touched his cheek. As someone who's tired of running from the best thing that ever happened to her, twice. Thomas leaned into her touch, feeling years of guilt and grief begin to fade. We'll need to take it slow, Nellie. Is wise beyond her years, Amaris smiled, and deserves all the stars we can give her. Outside, Burlington's lights twinkled, like earthbound constellations. In her bed, Nellie slept peacefully, her fever finally broken while monitors marked the steady rhythm of healing. And by the window, two people who had spent 13 years orbiting each other's lives stood close enough to share the same breath, the same hope, the same future stretching out before them like an endless sky. Some stars, after all, take longer to align, but when they do, they burn all the brighter for the waiting. 3 months later, snow fell softly outside the kitchen window of Thomas's craftsman house, each flake catching the December morning light like tiny stars. Inside, the scent of vanilla and coffee mingled with winter sunshine as Amaris stood at the counter, carefully wrapping a small package in silver paper. "Is that for my check-up today?" Nellie asked from her perch at the breakfast bar, where she was adding careful details to her latest drawing. "Maybe." Amaris smiled, securing the last piece of tape. "Dr. Landry mentioned how brave you've been with your treatments." Thomas watched them from the doorway, taking in the quiet domesticity of the scene. So much had changed in 3 months, yet some things felt as natural as breathing. Like the way Amaris now spent more mornings here than at her own apartment, the way Nellie sought her opinion on astronomical discoveries and art projects, the way his mother had quietly added a third stocking to the mantel, embroidered with careful stars. "The fever's coming," Nellie said matter-of-factly, not looking up from her drawing. "I can feel it." Amaris moved to feel her forehead, not as a doctor now, but as someone who had learned every pattern of Nellie's condition. 3 more days by the calendar. "Do you want me to call Dr. Landry?" "No, we know what to do." Nellie added a final star to her picture. "And you'll be here." The simple confidence in her voice made Thomas's throat tight. They'd settled into a rhythm with Nellie's P-FAPA episodes, the predictable fever cycles, the medications, the quiet days of recovery. "Doctor." Landry managed her treatment from Boston, but it was Amaris who held Nellie through the worst nights, who knew exactly when to expect each spike, who kept detailed notes in a journal dedicated to tracking patterns, not as her doctor, as family. "Ready for breakfast?" Thomas finally stepped into the kitchen, dropping a kiss on Nellie's head before moving to pour coffee. "Reed's opening the garage this morning." "2 sugars," Amaris reminded him unnecessarily, accepting her cup with a smile that still made his heart skip. She wore one of his old flannel shirts over her jeans, and her braids were loose around her shoulders. So different from the careful professional he'd reconnected with 3 months ago. "Look," Nellie held up her drawing. "It's us." Thomas moved to see better, Amaris warm against his side. The picture showed 3 figures standing under a sky full of stars, but these weren't random dots. They formed clear constellations, carefully labeled in Nellie's improving handwriting. "That's Ursa Major," Nellie pointed, "and that's Cassiopeia. And that one," she indicated a pattern she'd drawn herself. "That's ours, the family star." Amaris's hand found Thomas's, squeezing gently. They'd come so far from that first night in the emergency room, from professional distance and careful boundaries, from the weight of 13 years' silence. "Perfect morning for stargazing," Thomas said, nodding toward the snow outside. "Sky'll be clear tonight." "Can we use the telescope?" Nellie's eyes brightened. "The one Grandma got me?" "Homework first," Amaris reminded her, though her tone was soft. "But yes, if the fever holds off, it will." Nellie's confidence was absolute. The stars know when to wait. Later, after Nellie had left for school and Thomas for the garage, Amaris stood in the living room, adding her own small touches to the holiday decorations Margaret had helped arrange. Her fingers traced the edge of a framed photograph on the mantel, not the old one of Claire, which still held its place of honor, but a new one. In it, Nellie sat between Thomas and Amaris on the porch swing, all three laughing at something, off camera while autumn leaves fell around them. Her phone buzzed, a text from Thomas. "Reed says the coffee maker's broken again. Think you can stand another mechanic's lunch?" Amaris smiled, remembering summer evenings spent on a wooden bench, outside that same garage, sharing dreams and coffee and possibilities. Some patterns, it seemed, were written in the stars long before we recognized their shape. "Always," she typed back. Then, after a moment, "Bringing vanilla cookies this time." She turned back to the window, where snow continued to fall on this quiet Vermont morning. Soon she'd head to the hospital for her shift, where other children needed her professional care and measured distance. But here, in this house that had become home, she could be more than Dr. Lyle. Here she could be part of a constellation that had taken 13 years to find its perfect pattern. Here, finally, all their stars had aligned. What did you learn from this story? Amaris would later ask Nellie during one of their telescope sessions, when the young girl pointed out that some stars only revealed their true patterns after patient observation. "That the best things are worth waiting for," Nellie answered, wise beyond her years. "Like constellations, and family, and love," Amaris thought, watching Thomas adjust the telescope's focus with careful hands. Some loves were written in the stars all along, just waiting for the right moment to shine. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.